title of this recording is Brothers, From Childhood to Oasis, The Real Story, written by myself, Paul Gallagher, with a little bit of help from Terry Christian. The first section is read by my mother, so now, over to you, Ma. Take it away.
I was christened in Charlestown, County Mayo. My father was a labourer who worked for the local council. He came from Sligo. As a family we were very poor. We never had shoes or socks. Altogether there ended up 11 of us. At night the girls slept 6 to a bed, 3 at the bottom and 3 at the top. Things didn't improve when my father left home around that time. He just disappeared, never said goodbye or anything. My mother couldn't afford to look after us when he'd gone, and so we were taken into care. My sisters and myself had to go to a convent in Ballahadreen, where we lived, for the next 6.5 years. I left school aged 13 and a half and went straight out to work. My first job was in a grocery store and pub, doing kitchen work for £1 a week, working from 8 in the morning until 9 or 10 at night. My second job was in a confectionery store. After 2 years of working there, I had to go back home because my mother was very ill with her heart and needed me to look after my brothers and sisters. I was 16 at the time. When I was 18, I decided it was time to move on. It was then that I first came over to Manchester. I started working at the old Central Railway station, waiting on tables. I lived at the station and worked shifts, either from 6 a.m. until 2 p.m. or from 2 p.m. until 10 p.m. There were a lot of Irish people in Manchester at that time, and we stuck together, I suppose. We used to go dancing at the Astoria Club in Plymouth Grove, which was an Irish club. I met my future husband, Tommy Gallagher, at the Astoria Club in January 1964. Looking back, I can't see what was good about Tommy Gallagher. He was always tight with money. Wherever we were going, he'd always meet me there, so he didn't have to pay for me to get in. It was an odd courtship. He'd go away for a month at a time working, sometimes 2 months, and never phone me to say where he was. He'd spin stories and weave a whole web of lies, but he had the charm and I'd believe his excuses. Before I married, I started to see the other side of him, the quick temper. But by then I couldn't back out because all the arrangements for the wedding were made. Even my mother told me that I was far too young to get married and that I shouldn't do it. In the end, I just went ahead with it and got married on the 27th of March 1965 in Manchester. Afterwards, we lived in a one-bedroom flat in Longsight. It was when I got pregnant that I really started to see his bad side and the violent temper he had. I was working all the time I was pregnant, and Tommy would still go away working on the building sites, only coming back at the weekends. Just before I had the baby, we moved into a 2-bedroom house, 2 Sandycroft Street, Longsight. I gave birth there to a boy, which was the best day of my life because I thought this one's mine and no one can take him from me. When Paul was 7 months old, I got pregnant again with Noel. There wasn't really much violence when I had Paul, but before Noel was born, Tommy got really out of hand. One time there was a big row. I couldn't tell what it was about, but he kicked and smashed and dragged and beat me. It was terrible. Noel was born in the same house on the 29th of May 1967, so I had 2 babies. One newly born and the other 16 months old. Tommy was never the type to bother with small babies, so I was looking after the 2 of them, getting up in the night with them, and I still went out to work. I had no choice. Paul and Noel grew up not really knowing their dad. They were just scared of him. If they cried, he hit them. If they stammered, he hit them. They were the best times of my life when I had the 2 of them. Then I became pregnant again. Liam was born on the 21st of September 1972, and 2 weeks later we went to live in Burnage in a 3-bedroom council house. After 1 or 2 months in Burnage, everything started to go drastically wrong. Liam wasn't well as a baby. He had eczema and he was born with psoriasis. He was ill for over 6 months, crying morning, noon and night. His father would sooner go out than look after the child. By the time Liam was 18 months old, I decided to leave their father. He'd come back home taking it out on me and the kids, and yet still be the perfect gentleman to everyone outside. People didn't want to work with him because of his shouting and brawling, roaring and fighting. Eventually he lost his concreting business because he wouldn't turn up for it. It was almost like fate when the father had to be taken to hospital with a bad back in October 1983. I said a prayer that he wouldn't come back. It was 2 months before he came home again, but in the meantime the possibility of a council house had come up. I couldn't tell him when we were going to leave because he would have killed us. Eventually we moved out in 1984 to the house I live in now. There was nothing in it, only the 4 walls and the sink in the kitchen. The council offered me the house on the Monday and I told them we could move in on Friday night when the father had gone out. We were still moving stuff out at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a real midnight flyer. I always told him that one day he'd come in and we'd be gone. I'd say I wouldn't be here at all except for the kids. Then Tommy would get really annoyed, saying, I never want anything of those 3 bastards. You will, I'd say to him. You'll want them long before they'll need you. Because at the end of the day, if you haven't got your family, you haven't got anything. When we moved, things got better, but Liam was very affected by it all. He was still in school, and 12 is a funny age. He was very psychologically affected by his father. So was Noel, but Noel is deeper than Liam and kept it all to himself. Anyway, we got settled in the house and we got it all together and made a nice home of it. And our lives started to change. Then Noel went off with spiral carpets. In the meantime, I got divorced from their father. I never wanted any contact with him or to see him again. Neither did Noel, Paul or Liam. I remember at school Liam was a very different kettle of fish from Paul and Noel. Even when he was 5, he loved being noticed. When Liam was 11, he began at St Mark's Secondary School. From day one you knew he was going to be trouble because he had no intentions of doing anything. He had to be cock of the class, hang out with the best group and generally be better than everybody else. It was like he was born to that. Liam loved attention. I paid more visits to that school over Liam than I can remember. I tried to explain to his teachers that a lot of it was to do with his father. I tried to persuade the headmaster, hoping he wouldn't expel him. Liam didn't really know what he wanted to do. He used to say, I'll be famous one day, Mum, and you'll be proud of me. I wasn't put on this earth to dig holes, I was put on this earth for something special. Noel did well with the spiral carpets. That's what he wanted to do at the time, but I knew his ambition was to be in his own band. By the time Noel came back from America, Liam was in a band and Noel immediately wanted to join it. And that was how he came to be in Oasis. They'd come back after every gig and I'd ask if they had any luck. Noel would always answer, no, not yet, Mum, until one night, after he'd been in Scotland, he came back and I asked him if he had any luck, and he said, yeah, I think we got a record deal. He was so excited. By then Liam was really into the music. He kept on saying how he could feel it in his bones that they were going to be famous, and one day he'd be this big rock and roll star and he'd make me very proud of him, but he'd still not a penny of money on him. I'd say, yeah, Liam, I've heard it all before. Now will you get off your backside and get yourself a proper job because I can't keep you anymore. It's strange how things worked out. Noel was always very quiet. You never really knew what he was thinking. His father left a big scar on him. It affected all 3 of them. That's why Liam is so aggressive now, because he's got all this hatred built up. But now it's all behind us. For the past 12 years we've been happy. I had 20 years of violence and none of us could take any more. The violence was terrible even to his own sons. Why Tommy wants to be a father now to Paul, Noel and Liam when he was never a father to them when they needed him, I'll never know.
My youngest brother Liam hates being called the baby of the family. Now our Liam is a one-off on this planet, and we should be grateful for small mercies. He's always had that sullen expression on his face, like someone's just pissed all over his fireworks, but take it from me, he's laughing inside half the time. Poor Liam was my mum's baby, but he always wanted to act bigger and older than he was. We were always being pushed by our mum to take Liam with us and look after him. I recall one hot and glorious summer day, a gang of us decided we'd cycle over to Red Rock in Cheadle for the day and get a taste of country living. At Red Rock there was a stream that flowed into the River Mersey, and we could swing across on a rope that hung over it. Just as we were setting off, our mam uttered the dreaded words, "Take Liam with you!" When we got there, we were sitting around chatting and sunbathing. Liam was bored hanging around and wandered off on his own. He slipped on a rock and fell into the stream, which was fairly deep and had a very strong current. Now neither Noel nor myself can swim, and we really panicked because we knew Liam couldn't either. We were frozen, helplessly watching as our little brother was being swept away by the current. Liam's foot got tangled up in some debris in the stream, and he couldn't drag himself out. Luckily, our friend Paul Hewitt went straight in and dislodged Liam from his untimely and near-fatal brush with the bottom of that stream. If it hadn't been for Paul Hewitt, Liam wouldn't be here today. Everything was a game to Liam. He was hyperactive. If he was annoying our Noel, he'd just give Liam this look, a stern gaze, drooping his eyebrows. Liam knew then to shut up. I bet Noel wishes he could shut Liam up like that now. My guitar had been gathering dust for a few years, but Noel played all the time. Not to be left out, Liam wanted a guitar, so I let him use mine. The trouble was, Liam didn't stand out enough during his music lessons with just a guitar, so one day he came home and asked our mum to buy him a violin. My mum got herself into debt, buying him a violin for about £35. The most comical thing my mum remembers is a 9-year-old Liam insisting that he go to school with both his violin and guitar, one in each hand, just to show the other kids that whatever they had, he had more. I can't remember any great tunes being scraped on that violin or any catchy melody strummed on that guitar, but Liam kept up his music lessons on the violin until he started at Barlow High. Pretty soon after that, Liam decided he no longer wanted to play the violin as it was sissy. He dumped his guitar for the same reason, also probably because he realised that he'd have to practice to be as good as Noel and decided to be a hooligan instead. Our mum was always on at us not to be so mean with each other. She really did protect Liam, not only from us but also from my dad. She knew the effect our dad had on Noel and me. All the problems with our stammers, my being bullied and constantly whinging, always trying to ingratiate myself with everyone, how quiet and moody Noel was staying up in his bedroom on his own for hours. Liam was spirited and a live wire, and there's no way our mum wanted that beaten out of him. Although he was a right pain in the neck, and I know he has his hang-ups and insecurities, he's always had a belief and confidence about his manner that he can thank our mother for giving him. When he was about 9 or 10, I'd have to take him to the Odd Man City match, usually on my mum's orders. At the match he wanted everything. "I'm starving, can I have some chips?" "You just had your dinner. Here you are now, shut up." "Will you get me a programme? Can I have some crisps?" It was cheaper taking a girl out for the night than taking our Liam to the match. When I'd protest to our mum and ask why Noel couldn't take him to the match, she'd say, "Noel's too dopey. He'll start daydreaming and forget Liam there and lose him." When he went to secondary school, he decided he wanted to start putting gel in his hair. He asked me to do it for him. He was that paranoid about his cow's lick showing, I'd have to put about 2 tons of gel on him to slick it down. Then he'd go off to Barlow High like Mr. Cool, with all his hair slicked back like some 1950s throwback. The girls at school all thought Liam was Mr. Cool too. Every morning throughout his secondary school years, there'd be 2, usually 3, but sometimes as many as 5 girls calling for him to walk him to school. I used to answer the door when I was getting ready for work, and there'd be 3 young girls there saying, "Is Liam in? He's dead fit, your brother." Stardom is nothing new to our Liam. He swaggered off to school every morning with his female escorts like God's gift. To help hone his aggressiveness, Liam decided he wanted a punch bag for Christmas. Noel and I were too big for him by then. After beating it to a pulp for a few months, he joined the Ardwick Boxing Club. He was about 12 or 13 years old at the time. It turned into the usual debacle. On one occasion, Liam got gloved up for his first bout of boxing with another 12-year-old at the club. The other kid could box, and our Liam couldn't, which meant that Liam got hit, and Liam hates being hit. Finally, his famous Irish temper, a present from my dad's chromosomes no doubt, just snapped. Liam tore the gloves off his hands and just steamed into the kid he was sparring with, grabbing his hair, punching him, kicking him, literally battering him senseless. By the next day, everyone at his school had heard the story. Liam became the kid not to mess around with. Everyone knew him, and that is exactly what he wanted and expected. The problem is, when you are the undisputed cock of the school, you're expected to get into fights with the hard guys of other schools. It all went rather seriously sour for our Liam when the 3 lads from a rival school, St Thomas Aquinas, came down to sort him out. One of them pulled out a hammer and smashed it down on Liam's head. Liam just went wild, punching and kicking these 3 lads until one by one they went down. He looked a right state with blood streaming all over his head, face and clothes like an extra for some Stephen King splatter movie. All the girls in the school were crying, as Liam was the lad they all fancied, the school heartthrob. He was suspended indefinitely from school, and not for the first time I might add. After 3 weeks of kicking his heels at home, my mum went and begged them to take him back, which they finally did after making it clear that if he ever stepped out of line again, he would be out. Recently, I've noticed Liam becoming more paranoid. He called me up not long ago and asked whether I thought he should get himself checked out in case that hammer blow had caused him any serious long-term damage. I reassured him that he was a mad balmy bastard before he got hit with the hammer. When it comes to the side of his personality that deals with women, our Liam is what people call a babe magnet. Some women do want to mother him, sure, but Liam's all man and he's fun to be with. Girls have always fancied him, and he can even be quite sweet when he wants to be. He can be temperamental, a murder to live with. I think our man would agree with that, but even his ex-girlfriends who've had storming rows and acrimonious splits with still ask after him affectionately. And not just because he's now a pop star. Patsy Kensit seems to have done our Liam good. She's not on a big star trip. She seems plugged into the real world, and my mum's very taken with her. She sees her as a good steadying influence on Liam and admires her for being able to, well, put up with him. Liam's the one who gives Oasis their appeal to the kids, or as one writer put it, Noel is the heart, Liam is the soul and the spirit. But I think in terms of talent he's more than just a pretty face. Although the song he wrote with Bonehead, Take Me, was very similar in style to the Stone Roses, it was a good song, and I'm sure when he can sit still and muse one day, he'll get round to writing some more. If the day comes when Oasis split, Liam will still be a star and have a very successful solo career. Now we move on to Noel. Noel was a likeable if quietish kid, friendly to the last but prone to bouts of moodiness, a trait he's carried on through to adulthood. If anything ever seriously bothered our Noel, he'd never talk about it. He always preferred to keep it to himself. Noel was a total daydreamer. He was always telling stories about what he'd got up to. We were pretty skint as a family at that time, but Noel would spin stories to the kids saying we had this and we had that and we'd done this and we'd done that. At home, he tried to steal off to his bedroom and play with my guitar before he got one of his own. He also borrowed a new harmonica our dad had bought, but he couldn't master it, so he never bothered after that. Noel wasn't a nutcase like our Liam. He was always quite shrewd and calculating. Mind you, there was no point in Noel and me being right nutcases when we had mates like Youngie and Paul Hewitt. The fact that our mum and dad were really strict never kept us out of trouble. I think Noel thrived on doing the wrong thing and was never that bothered if he got caught. Looking back now, it was probably partly his way of getting back at me dad, and partly to win back the attention which he'd had off me mum before Liam come along. Noel had a fair few accidents. Once in Ireland when he was about 5 or 6, he tried to ride this big dog like it was a horse. Well, the dog wasn't amused and savaged his arm. He's still got the scars today. The sorriest day I ever felt for Noel was when he was having a go on a makeshift swing at school. It was attached to a tree by ropes and swung out over a steep embankment. Noel was swinging out high and the rope snapped. Noel ended up breaking both his arms. No more guitar playing for a while, but that might have been when he started trying out the harmonica. On another occasion, there were 6 or 7 of us kicking a ball about in the local park, using 2 oak trees as the goalposts. Some local bullies decided they'd have a game of darts against the trunk of one of the trees that we were using as goalposts. I stood across for the ball over the goal line and felt a sudden sharp pain at the top of my head. I reached up with my hand and to my horror felt the plastic flight of a dart protruding from my skull. I started to panic. I was standing there asking everyone to remove the dart and everyone was backing off as if I might explode at any minute. Then our Noel strolled up, cool as you like, and took the offending object out of my sore and bloody head. Noel was in many ways like an older brother. He probably wasn't as daft and impressionable as me. I took great delight when the other kids nicknamed Noel Brezhnev. You know, after the Russian president, famous for his huge bushy eyebrows. The fact that I had the same bushy eyebrows never crossed my mind. Noel's nickname really took off during the 1982 World Cup. Our Noel was 15 at the time. A big 5-a-side tournament was organised on Kringle Fields near our house. There was a lad there called Tony Rafferty who was captain. Our Noel was a good player, but lazy. Those summer afternoons you'd hear Tony Rafferty screaming at Noel, "Fucking hell, Brezhnev, chase that bleeding ball!" Noel hates having a piss taken out of him. Not because he's precious, but believe it or not, he's hypersensitive. We all are. It's funny how our Noel ended up playing the guitar. In fact, I was the first to get a guitar, and Noel used to play with it. He'd have been about 8 then, which is 6 years younger than Eric Clapton when he started playing. Arnold was really into the guitar and could play it better than me, despite the fact that I jealously tried to restrict his time on it and refused to show him any more than a few chords. In the end, our man bought Noel a guitar out of the catalogue for about £25 to £30 and paid it off weekly. He was seriously into playing the guitar like some junior junkie. Noel's strumming on his guitar was an incessant but almost comfortably familiar sound in our house at night. Then he got an electric guitar and an amp, and it was like, "Hello, rock and roll will never die." He'd crank the volume up and have that guitar squealing out all kinds of tunes and riffs. Noel always hated our dad, almost with a vengeance. It used to drive our dad mad just by sitting there saying nothing. Our dad would be ranting and raving at Noel to answer some question, or telling him to do something, and Noel would just sit there as if our dad wasn't even in the room. Noel used to annoy my dad by rejecting his Irishness. He didn't want to do all the things expected of Irish kids, and it wound my dad up. Noel was determined not to kowtow as often as I did, but it was a dangerous game to play, and only annoyed our dad more. Still, in Noel's mind, he could feel superior to me for standing up to him. There were crazy games in the Gallagher family. Noel, he always had lots of friends. He was always popular with the girls too. He had girlfriends from the age of 8 onwards. Later in life, he'd bring them home to get my mother's verdict. He was always the steady type, Noel, and he liked to have a relationship on the go. He was engaged when he was 18 to a girl from Levenshulme, called Diane, I think. Despite romantically buying her an engagement ring from our mum's catalogue, it didn't work out. Louise Jones was his first big love. He went out with her for 6 years and moved out of our home to live with her when he was 22 or 23. Louise is really into going out and clubbing, and she's quite tough with a strong personality. She could be as moody as him as well, so they were like soulmates for a while. Soon after splitting up with her, Noel admitted, "I don't think I'll ever get over it." About a year after they split up, he met his current girlfriend, Meg Matthews, through a friend, Rebecca DeRuvo, the MTV presenter. Noel seems quite happy and settled now, and our mum likes Meg a lot. So how can I sum Noel up? He's very ambitious. He always was. He's not fantastically confident, but quite brave, funny, intelligent, a bit paranoid at times, and incredibly big-headed and very moody. I sometimes think that Noel does think he's better than everyone else, and I don't mean just musically. He loves music. He likes to hang out with cool people, always wanting and needing to be the best. But then, all the Gallagher boys do. Noel's got a strong love-hate relationship with Liam. Like I say, we've always been like that with each other. Liam goes mad at Noel when he slags him off, but that's because Noel's better at it than Liam. This is one of Noel's quotes about Liam. "Me and our kid don't want to be rock stars, but when you come and watch us, we are. We disagree on everything, except that we're members of the same band. He'll be one of the greats, because he's not trying to be a rock star. He'll upset loads of people and just carry on and not give a damn. I give him the songs and say, right, sing that and keep out of my way." He was pretty cool at school, but since being in the band he's gone completely off the wall. He's beyond therapy. If I lived in America, I would have blown his head off by now and completely regretted it. Since I live in England, I just give him a black eye or something every now and then, shut him up. He doesn't write lyrics, he doesn't play any instrument, doesn't write anything. All he's required to do is stand there and sing and look good. And I think he gets pissed off by the fact that he doesn't actually do anything, because he can't. I can't recall the time when I was the only child. Arno was always around. Born 16 months after me, we went through childhood being dressed identically by me mum, so that people thought we were twins, and being hit the same by me dad. We even had identical bruises. Most of my mother's sisters were living in Manchester back then, and because my dad was frequently away, working, or just out and about, my aunties were often round at our house. They did spoil Noel and me, always making a fuss of us and giving us sweets. Noel especially was referred to as Mammy's little blue-eyed boy, until an even younger Gallagher came along to lay claim to that title. Our mother was immensely proud of us and took great joy in trying to give us the best and going without so much herself. Our favourite toys were cars. We had loads of them. Dinky cars, matchbox cars, corgi cars, even the James Bond Goldfinger Aston Martin with the ejector seat. Oh, and how could I forget those cement mixer lorries and my Meccano crane, which I didn't know how to make. I basically had a toy building site, which was about as close as I wanted to be to me dad. Because I was so sheltered and indulged at home by my mum and my aunties, I was frightened to death of starting at St Robert's Catholic Primary School. Every day my mum would literally have to drag me there, and I'd be screaming that I didn't want to go. At play time, I was always on my own. The other kids used to make fun of me stammer. I had a really bad one, so did Arnold. Our stammers were so pronounced that in the end our mum took us for speech therapy every week for 4 years to clear them up. Sweets were my comfort at that age. It was around that time I was rushed to hospital to get my stomach pumped. I'd found a bottle of orange-flavoured Junior Disprin at home and eaten the lot. Well, that would have been a real rock and roll suicide, overdosing on Junior Disprin at the age of 5. It was around this time that we acquired a new little brother, a screaming, whinging brat. He cried a lot when he was a baby too. Liam was christened William John Gallagher, the William part being changed later to the Irish version of the name Liam. All the way through the pregnancy my mother kept saying she was sure it would be a girl, but instead it was a bouncing, handsome bundle of a boy who was destined one day to perform in front of the thousands and started exercising his vocal cords from day one with all kinds of wailing. Bless him. A few weeks after Liam was born, we moved house from Sandycross Street in Longsight to the plusher surrounds of a 3-bedroom council house in Leafy Burnage. A change of house meant a new skill, and we started at St Bernard's Catholic Primary School on Burnage Lane. We settled in well round Burnage and played outside a lot more than we could in Longsight. I'm not bragging when I say that I was the first of my mother's sons to show a talent for music by getting into the school choir when I was 7. I got some stick from the other lads at school because I was the only boy, but I loved it. Like Pavarotti, my voice was my instrument. It was my only claim to fame, the only thing I was recognised as having done well, probably to this date. We sang in Mass every Sunday and on other special church occasions. Being in that choir meant everything to me, so you can imagine how I felt when my dad put the brakes on it. I was 10. I'd been in the choir for nearly 3 years, and it was going to be a big event. On a Saturday morning, the St Bernard's Church Choir had been asked to sing at an ordination ceremony. We practised all the hymns, and we were looking forward to it. Then my dad suddenly announces that he wants me to go off with him at 7 o'clock that Saturday morning to a house in Bolton to help him lay a new concrete floor in some old lady's house. He said, "Remember, choirs are for sissies and girls. I'll take you out working with me and make a man out of you." So while the rest of the choir were off singing at his priest's ordination, I was mixing concrete. When I returned to school on the Monday, I was told by our priests, Father Tangi and Father Arkwright, that my vocal services were no longer required, as it was deemed a cardinal sin for a member of the choir not to turn up to sing at the ordination of a young priest. To this day, it's the one thing that really hurts. Not any of the beatings my dad gave me, but getting kicked out of that choir. When I was 11, I went to St Mark's Senior School, an all-boys Catholic comprehensive. Every summer we'd escape from our dad for 5 weeks or so by going to Ireland with my mum and her brother, our Uncle Paddy. Paddy lived in Yorkshire, and he'd drive across to pick us up in his car and take us to Holyhead, where we'd get the ferry across to Dunleary, and then we'd all drive over to Charlestown, County Mayo, for a few stress-free weeks. Around this time I desperately wanted some money for my football cards, as I was mad on them for a while. This was the period when my dad was earning a big wage, and yet he never gave us any pocket money. He'd leave all his loose change lying out on the dresser in the bedroom, loads of it. I didn't know he counted every penny, so I stole 50 pence. And my dad found out, he went absolutely apeshit, punching me and slapping me until I ended up on the floor. To stop him kicking me in the face, I curled up in a ball hoping he'd stop, but he got frustrated and stamped on my head. Our father, Thomas Augustine Gallagher, came from a big Irish family. Although not as big as my mum's, he had 5 brothers. I think their father was very hard on them, and they had a tough time relating to him, but I'm not going to make excuses for my own father's behaviour. Football always played a big part in our lives. The first City match I ever went to was Man City versus Newcastle at Main Road back in 1971. My dad took Noel and me, and we used to mither him to take us again after that. My dad was so tight that 4 or 5 times that he did take us, it would be 3/4 of the way through the game. He'd get us in free through the gates they opened at the ground to allow the early leavers to get out. We'd go in and my dad would ask, "Excuse me, what score is it?" 0-0. "See what I tell you, you're not missed nothing." Noel and I joined just about everything to get out of the house. The Cubs, the Scouts. We'd even volunteer to do bobber job to get away. To the outside world, we were a model family, I suppose. My dad, although a bit temperamental, seemed respectable enough, and was ingenuous in terms of buying drinks for his mates down the pub and club. We were all well-dressed kids who were in the Cubs, doing bobber job and went to church on Sunday. It was important to my mother. Abandoned as she and all her siblings had been by their father, she wanted to give us what she never had. Our dad wasn't a great bastion of morality. He gambled, drank, smoked, was violent, bossy, adulterous, and he was a top scally. He DJ'd around the Irish pubs and clubs in Manchester. He would never buy all the latest top 40 chart stuff. He'd just take the chart rundown on the radio, stop the tape machine before the radio DJ started talking. He used to have to buy the odd Irish record to play, but he mainly borrowed them off his mates. It's odd that I was scared of my dad, yet I always tried to do what he wanted and like what he liked. Later on in life I went drinking at all the Irish clubs and pubs. I even DJ'd at them, like he did. Arnold was never into the Irish clubs and all that. He found them depressing, with too many bad associations. I reckon that's why my dad picked on him. Noel didn't want to be what he had always called me, a plastic paddy. He didn't like the music, the accents, the bad jokes and the strange level of hypocrisy that existed in Manchester's Irish community. I loved it. I loved the clubs, enjoyed the familiarity, the music, the comforting routine. I think Noel felt shackled by it all and stifled. If there was anything he was going to rebel against, it was all the hypocrisy as he saw it, a life he didn't want being mapped out before him. When Noel wrote the lyrics to the song Whatever, was he singing about escaping from our father and the Irish heritage he felt being forced down his throat? My dad used to give us Irish records sometimes. It was oral brainwashing. It worked on me, but with Noel, well, I can really hear that song. The lyrics went something like this. I'm free to be whatever I choose, and I'll sing the blues if I want. I'm free to say whatever I like. If it's wrong or right, it's all right. It always seems to me you only see what people want you to see. I think Noel still sees those restraints and chains in everything, in life, relationships, places and times. That's what we both secretly admire Liam for. There's a wildness about him, a sense of freedom. It's like he expresses how both Noel and I felt inside. And if sometimes Liam can't quite keep a lid on his dissatisfaction, he's probably healthier than the two of us because of it. Liam didn't suffer that much violence from my dad, but he witnessed a lot of it, particularly against me mum. What lessons did my dad teach Liam by threatening anyone in the family who disagreed with him with violence and by shouting and roaring till everyone jumped to attention? He helped make us the people we are today. We all did real scally things. We felt restricted at home, so we went a bit wild when we got out. With the company we kept, it's a wonder we didn't end up in a detention centre. When Noel was 15 or 16, him and a mate robbed our local sweet shop. They just stuck their hands in the till and ran out with 12 pence. Or maybe it was 20 pence. Hardly the crime of the century, but I think our Noel ended up getting a caution off the police and solitary confinement and a good hiding from me dad. The first time I heard the Jam was when I bought the single, In the City in 1977. I thought Paul Weller was the coolest, hippest guy around. I had all the gear. An original American fishtail parka, a brown two-tone suit, pencil-thin ties. I had numerous fights and 2 parkas slashed with Stanley knives on separate occasions. That's where I got my nickname. I was Bod the Mod, but I hate that name, which is why Noel and Liam still delight in using it. Youngie and I were the odd bods because we're the only 2 mods in Burnage. At that time, Noel was a bit mixed up. He didn't know what he was. Punk, rockabilly, Smiths freak. He was all over the place. His favourite band were the Sex Pistols until he discovered the Smiths, and he looked a right balloon in his yellow tartan trousers with zips and rips everywhere. Then he was a rockabilly, wearing a donkey jacket with a big Confederate flag on the back and a goon haircut. Music was an escape. We were all lucky to have Mr. Sifter's record shop, owned by Peter Howard. The shop sold mainly second-hand records and rarities. Noel and I have bought records there for 18 years. We used to love going through the racks of old vinyl, albums, 7-inch singles and picture discs. Sometimes I'd come across some rare 7-inch piece of vinyl and the hairs on the back of my neck would rise. I'd be that excited. There were rare occasions when the odd record disappeared up the front of my original American Fishtail Parker. But I'll always repay you, Peter, by advertising your shop as one of the biggest influences behind the greatest band in the world today. Because of the company I kept, I got roped into all things parents warn you about. Glue sniffing, petty crime, burglary, you name it. I was to some extent an accessory. I was quite shocked when Liam said that his favourite drug was glue. It was probably a wind-up, but I don't know every single thing he got up to in his teenage years. I just daydreamed my way through 5 years of school at St Mark's, so I left without taking any exams. For some reason we always ended up hanging around in Levenshulme, where the action isn't. When you're on the dole and all your mates are working, it's the worst feeling in the world. But in Levenshulme, neither Noel nor my good self felt any stigma, as everybody else was out of work, and potless, skint. We tried playing football all day, but it didn't fill the void and that emptiness we all embrace in adolescence. There weren't that many nice girls in Levenshulme, so we moved to pastures new. Reddish Vale in Stockport was a bit on the rough side, but the girls were more numerous and easily impressed, especially if you had a Manc accent. Noel's quiet exterior actually worked in his favour. Plenty of girls would think of him as shy, but strong and silent and deep. Self-obsessed and moody would have been more like it. My 18th birthday was spent on a freezing night in the middle of January on Greenbank playing fields with 2 girls and a few bottles of cider. One of the girls, Paula, I took a particular fancy to, and that night was a roaring success. That was my 18th birthday, budget style. At Reddish Vale, the local lads would all run off home when they saw a large group of Levenshulme lads. Including Noel and me, there would have been about 20 of us. Noel only hung out with us occasionally. I was glad he was there on one particular night, when he decided to go to the rougher end of Reddish Vale and really show the locals who was boss. We started chasing these biker guys, calling them names and threatening to give them a kicking. Suddenly one of them stopped his bike, pulled out an air rifle and opened fire. He was joined by a very mean-looking bunch of 15 to 20 older lads. We ran for what looked like some skill playing fields, but first we had to get over a fence. It was covered in that anti-climbing paint, and I can't climb over. Noel, who'd already got to the top of the fence, was pulling me up by my jacket which ripped. I was yards away from getting a group kicking when I finally scrambled over. Noel started to think we were all losers, and it was beginning to look that way to me too. I had a mate with his own flat. We crashed there at night sometimes, dropping acid with Youngie. One time I came across Youngie and another couple of lads in a beat-up old brown Triumph Dolomite about 1 in the morning. They told me to get in, so I went with them to Whalley Range, an area of huge old houses. I was told to wait, so I waited while they went off to do a few houses. I could hear an alarm sounding, and by the time they got back with the gear, the police had arrived. They tried to stop us, hanging onto the car, but we drove off, went too fast round the corner, and 200 yards from where we'd left the coppers, we crashed. Youngie and me ran off in different directions. The police were searching for us. I crawled into some bushes in the back garden and lay there, hardly breathing. I attentively rose from the bushes as light was breaking, and then literally ran all the way to Levenshulme and our mate's safe flat. It amuses me when the press gets so hot under the collar about our old burgling houses. He knew Youngie, who was notorious at one time. I can't see it myself. Noel could have been a lookout, as he was quick and crafty, but I'm not swallowing that burglary bullshit. We carried on dabbling in drugs like amphetamines and LSD. One of the last times I took drugs was in 1984 when I was 18. It was just before we left our dad. After that I didn't feel the need. Noel wasn't that big into drugs at that time. He'd have a bit of cannabis, but didn't every kid back then? I don't think anything stronger appealed to him. Noel got high on his Smiths records. He was that ultimate box-room rebel waiting to break free. Noel could handle being out of work better than me because it gave him more time for his music, and he had Louise to keep him sane and confident. My dad said I should go and work for him. I wasn't keen, but my mum wasn't working at the time and I needed to be out earning. Working for my dad was no treat. Still, I'd normally come out with about £100 a week plus my social security money. When Noel left school, he was in a similar situation, so he worked for Dad too. Now, Noel is the hardest working man in pop music. He likes playing the guitar, writing songs and being in a band, so he will work hard. Get him on a building site, however, and that staunch work ethic is non-existent. Noel once said that I had a God-given talent for digging holes. Compared to Noel, a one-armed dwarf with a bad case of arthritis had a talent for digging holes. Noel was never that strong physically, and he was a right lazy git. He didn't take to any physical labouring jobs, but he was smart and had it all sussed. He could hide and doss about for hours without getting caught. Our mum had been legally separated from our dad for years. We were desperate for her to find us another house away from him. Things started to go right the day my dad slipped a disc, quite badly at work. He was taken into hospital for an operation on his spine, and it was nearly 2 months before he came home. After 2 months of peace, he was back, a bigger pain in the neck than ever. Finally, my mum got us a council house on the other side of Burnage, about a mile away. We did a midnight flyer when my dad was out one Friday night, and by the time he returned the next morning we were gone. The press never seemed to get this right. To quote from the Daily Star, among others, Tommy Gallagher's family walked out on him 11 years ago after songwriter Noel, then a teenager, beat him up in a bloody brawl following years of violence. Noel has said, "The last time I saw him was when 2 paramedics were carrying him out of the house to hospital." Those first few weeks of life without father was sheer bliss. It's hard to explain that sense of freedom. You'll hear it in Noel's song lyrics. Those lines about breaking out and being free, and his appreciation of what our mother did for us. Liam did resent it for a while, but only because his mates were all round our old house. As for me father, he never dared come round. I suspect he was glad to see the end of his responsibilities. He was supposed to pay a certain amount of money to our mum for Liam, but he never did. Money was tight at the new house, so in order for Noel and me to make some decent wages, we still had to go out to work on the building sites with dearest Daddy. He wasn't bothered that we left. It may have been what he wanted all along, but it wouldn't have gone down well in that Irish community he was so fond of. There was a lot of shame attached to your wife and kids leaving you. I moved on to Kennedy Civil Engineering and got Noel a job there. When he first started, he was working outside with me, digging holes, as he and Liam always put it. Noel couldn't handle the outside graft. In fact, he hated it. Later, when Liam came to work at Kennedy's, it was the same scenario. He didn't like the outside graft, and he wouldn't let me or any of these other Irish blokes teach him how to handle the spade properly. Liam worked on and off, but more often than not he was on the dole scrounging money from me and my mum. He ended up staying on at school until he was 17, which meant he kicked around doing odd jobs and signing on for 18 months or so before he joined Oasis. It's scary to think that though Noel, Liam and myself are different in many ways, we've all inherited loads of bad traits from our dad. One thing we gladly inherited from him, though, is our support for Manchester City Football Club. I remember Noel and even Liam being upset when City were relegated to the old second division back in 1983. It was that first drop that could have destroyed us as fans. We were young, we were heartbroken, but we decided to make the most of it. So to show our loyalty to the Blues, Noel and I went to nearly all the away games that season, as well as the home games. I remember once we went to Sheffield, a town famous for its steel. It was home to the finest knives in Europe, and boy did those Sheffield United fans know how to use them. We'd gone down early on the train to get some serious drinking in before the match kicked off, but what we didn't realise though was that we'd stick out like sore thumbs even though Sheffield's only 40 miles away. We were ambushed by a mob of Sheffield United fans outside Rackham's store in the town centre. Noel was the first to get it, with his head pushed into the glass pane of a window. I ran over to help him and bumped into a girl pushing a kid in a pram, and then I saw nothing. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in hospital with a numb head and a nurse telling me I was being wheeled in to have my head x-rayed for a suspected fractured skull. I was thinking, I didn't come 40 miles to spend all day in hospital. Noel had been treated too, but we discharged ourselves and went to get a taxi to take us to the game. Anyway, Noel and I, much for the worse for wear, finally made it to Bramall Lane for kick-off and watched Man City play out a lame and tame draw. It's hard for me to talk about my brother Noel. Although I can't recollect a time when he wasn't around, he doesn't encourage closeness. You certainly wouldn't say he was loud. In fact, he's probably shyer than either myself or Liam until he gets to know somebody. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that Noel's a huge pop star whose strangers stop me and pester me about. He's my brother. Sometimes I miss him. Other times he gets on my nerves, and I'm glad he's down in London or wherever he happens to be. One thing's for certain, he can really play his guitar. Noel used to go to lots of gigs when he was quite young. I remember him go to see Adam and the Ants with his girlfriend when he was about 13 or 14 at the Apollo in Manchester, and going with her to see the Sex Pistols film The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. As he got older, he was always keen to meet other musicians and wished to be recognised by them for his talent. I think that's why Noel likes to hang out now with Paul Weller and people like that. Noel, Liam and I were constantly competing with each other in every way you could think of. Noel and Liam still are. Recently Liam turned up at my mum's house in Burnage with Patsy Kensit and showed me his £30,000 Bristol car. They only make 8 a year, and although it was a 1981, it was very impressive. What do you reckon, Bod? Better than Noel's Rolls Royce? I just thought, good on you, Liam. Pity neither you nor Noel can drive. Noel was a keen follower of the local band scene in Manchester. He had been a huge Smiths fan. He bought each single on the day it came out and went to see them play at the GMX with New Order, The Fall, and some other Manchester bands in that one-off From Manchester with Love concert in 1986. He even got Morrissey's autograph through our Auntie Anne, who worked at the same Bupa hospital where Morrissey's dad was a porter. He loved Morrissey and certainly bought his first solo album, and he thought Johnny Marr the coolest guitarist in the world. He'd spend hours in his bedroom playing his Smiths records, playing along with him, learning Johnny Marr's riffs. His favourite was the instrumental track on the B-side of the single Panic. It was called The Dre's Train. He drove us mad with that one. The Smiths and Johnny Marr really were crucial in helping Noel make up his mind that he was going to play music for a living. He'd done some taping and jamming around in Burnage. For a time Noel used to hang out with Paul Barsley. Before Paul played guitar and sang with Manchester band Molly Arford, and more recently Wireless, he and Noel had a little 5-piece outfit called Fantasy Chicken and the Amateurs. Noel and Paul Barsley took it in turns to write songs and sing, although I remember Paul Barsley saying he once criticised one of Noel's guitar riffs as sounding like a cat crawling up an alley. Noel first met Graham Lambert at the Inspiral Carpets at the International 2 Club in Manchester. It must have been fate, because that was where, 25 years earlier, my mum had first met our dad, only then it was called the Astoria. It was the 29th of May 1988, and Noel was out celebrating his 21st birthday. The gig was James and the Stone Roses. Not a bad bill. Noel just got chatting to Graham about gigs and playing the guitar. Graham invited him onto the guest list for the next Inspiral Carpets gig, a week or so later. In July 1988, the Inspiral Carpets released the 12-inch EP Keep the Circle Round on Playtime Records, which was a big success. When Stephen Holt, the lead singer, left the Inspirals, it was big news in Manchester. Everyone thought he was mad. The hottest ticket for would-be vocalists in Manchester was to get that job as singer with the Inspiral Carpets. Noel was a fan and got on well with Graham Lambert, who's got a great sense of humour, and he really looked up to the Inspirals' Clint Boone. I think Noel saw him as some sort of mentor. Noel wanted to be their new singer. As fate would have it, they auditioned Noel but turned him down for the vocalist job. Noel was disappointed because they said his voice wasn't strong enough, but the Inspirals offered him a job with the band as a roadie and instrument technician. This gave Noel ample opportunity to expand his musical dexterity and get paid for looking after, setting up and playing about with guitar, bass, keyboards and drums. The fact that he could fiddle about with Clint's Farfisa organ, Graham's guitar and Noddy's drums during sound checks and rehearsals and all those hours on end in various studios over 4 and a bit years meant that by the time Noel left he'd more or less mastered every instrument. Noel started flying around the world with them. He got his hair cut in that famous bowl cut like Clint's and started wearing the loud big patterned shirts. In fact, by the time they had their first #1 album with Life, Noel actually looked more like a member of the band than the band members themselves. Towards the end of his time with them, Noel would play his own songs during sound checks for himself or whoever was around at the time. He may have kept himself very much to himself, but it was like when he strummed his guitar in his bedroom at night, you could see it was a letting go of something inside him. For the most part, Noel loved his time with the Inspirals, going to Europe, Japan and America and being involved with a band who went on top of the Pops and played to 8,000 people at Manchester's GMX on 3 separate occasions. The place where our mum had worked when it was the old Central Station, and she'd just arrived in Manchester from Ireland. It was a buzz for him, as it would be for any 20 to 21-year-old. The Inspirals eventually sacked Noel around October 91, just before their last American tour. He had his own ambitions, and they felt his heart wasn't in the job anymore. It hurt Noel's pride to get the bullet from them, and he bristled about it for a good while. I think he realises now that he'd have done the same thing. Liam never liked guitar music or guitar bands. He thought they were all twats. Then when he was 17, he really got into the Stone Roses, albeit about 2 or 3 years after everyone else in Manchester. After In Spiral Carpets, the first gig our Liam went to was the Stone Roses at Spike Island in the summer of 1990. Liam loved everything about the Stone Roses, and they in turn got him into the Beatles. Most of all at that time, Liam loved Ian Brown. It was there at the Stone Roses gig, I think, that he decided for definite that he wanted to be in a band. In particular, to be the singer in a band, to be Ian Brown. That whole Manchester music explosion was the reason for Oasis. Liam's opportunity came when a local band called The Rain sacked their lead singer. I knew several guys out of The Rain. Paul Arthurs, Bonehead, always seemed to be in bands, and I'd seen him around for years carrying his keyboards under his arms, going to rehearse with whatever band he was in at the time. I didn't know Paul McGuigan, Gwigsy, the bass player, but I knew Tony McCarroll, the drummer, who was from Levenshulme. The line-up was Chris Hutton on vocals, Paul Arthur guitar, Tony McCarroll drums, and Paul McGuigan bass. They played a few inconspicuous gigs, including upstairs at Squire's Wine Bar in Disbury, but they were going nowhere. Then Chris Hutton left. Liam saw this as his big opportunity. He'd already modelled himself to look like a young Ian Brown. He even sang like him in the early days. Liam got in touch with Bonehead, Gwigsy and Tony and arranged an audition. They were quite keen to have Liam in the band, but he said he wasn't joining a band with a name like The Rain. He said they should call the band Oasis, and so that's what they did. Now there are a variety of different stories about where the name Oasis originated. There was the Ponzi explanation that it meant an oasis in a musical desert. Noel says it come from the name of a clothes shop in the Underground Market in Manchester. In fact, the truth is that the name came from an In Spiral Carpets poster that was in Liam and Noel's bedroom advertising a gig at the Swindon Oasis. I think our Liam just liked the sound and the look of the name and thought, I'm having that, I'm mad for it. Liam was well into being in a band, and be fair to him, he doesn't always get the credit that he should for really going in for it. Liam isn't the easiest going person in the world, but he wanted to be in a band so much, he put everything into it. Liam was on the dole at the time, but he really believed in the band, even if nobody else did. The first gig they played was supporting Sweet Jesus at the Boardwalk on Little Peter Street in Manchester on the 18th of August 1991, with a lineup of Liam on vocals, Bonehead on guitar, Paul McGuigan on bass and Tony McCarroll on drums. There were only about 40 or 50 people in the club, but among the audience were all the members of the In Spiral Carpets, Noel, his girlfriend Louise, and me. It was quite a grim gig, and I remember our Liam being really nervous about singing in front of all his mates. He still gets nervous about it now. Well, that night you could tell. On stage he did sound very Ian Brownish, struggling with some of the notes, but although it was far from brilliant, as debut gigs go, I've seen plenty worse. Liam's attempts at doing a few Ian Brown style steps on stage looks a bit goonish, so if you ever wonder why he stands still with his hands behind his back when he's singing on stage, you now know. The songs they played that night were all written by Liam and Bonehead. Take Me was the only one which survived after our Noel joined the band and started sorting the songs out. I don't think our Noel was particularly impressed that night, but he admired the way Liam had achieved what he wanted to achieve, which was to be the frontman in a band. Noel had always wanted to be in his own band, a band that performed his songs, but he was still with the In Spiral Carpets, and he probably thought it was too early. I suspect that if that lineup of Oasis had been really good, Noel would never have joined because he wanted to shape a band himself. The band was rehearsing at the Boardwalk. Noel had finished with the In Spiral Carpets by then, and had been given a fairly generous payoff of about £2,000. Towards the end he had been earning £500, £600 a week, which meant he had a few bob in his pocket. That certainly made having Noel in the band doubly appealing to Liam. Noel was living with Louise in a flat on Whitby Street in Manchester, a mere 5-minute walk from the Boardwalk. So Noel left the Inspiral Carpets and joined Oasis on what must be one of the best free transfers of all time. Noel knew that first and foremost what Oasis needed was songs, money and a lead guitarist. He fitted all those categories perfectly, and he had the experience of touring all over the world with the Inspiral Carpets and seeing how they managed to become successful. Al Liam's reasons for wanting Noel in were the same, but not necessarily in that order. Money, a lead guitarist, experience and probably lastly, songs. It was no secret that Noel wanted to be in a band, but not just any old band. It had to be right, and that for Noel basically meant his band. I think he saw in Liam what he wanted to be years earlier, a cocky, arrogant kid with a voice and a need and a desire to be heard and noticed. Things started a little shakily, and there were some major teething problems, the main one being that Noel walked straight in and started giving out orders. Liam resented this. After all, he'd been the one who got up off his backside, found a band, auditioned for them, got them to change their name, and then Noel comes back after being away for ages, swans in and takes over. That's where the whole battling Gallagher myth started. Noel made a big difference and quickly stamped his mark on the band. He had loads of songs and bits of songs that he'd written over the years, and he was trying to work a lot of these into the band. It was 5 months after Oasis' first gig that Noel played his debut gig with a band at the Boardwalk. With their new lead guitarist, they certainly looked and sounded more like a rock and roll band with a mission on that night of the 15th of January 1992. By the summer, after another couple of gigs, they even started to get a few write-ups. Steve Cowell, who wrote for a free Manchester paper come magazine called Uptown, interviewed Paul McGuigan and Noel in a Manchester pub and was really nice about the band. Penny Anderson gave them a good write-up, almost 1,000 words in the word column in the Manchester Evening News. She said that the band's demo tape was the best she'd heard all year. Despite the fact that their lyrics needed some work and the songs were a bit long, Penny had spotted a glimmer of originality. Noel was realistic about how far the band still had to go. Oasis music isn't pop or rock, but somewhere in between, maybe POC. We're going to bide our time until we feel confident enough to come up and then really go for it. Oasis were noisy and raucous. It took a while for the songs to settle in and for them to discover how to put them across. In September 1992, Manchester hosted its first In the City International Music Seminar, and every band in Manchester wanted a gig, but very few managed to land one. Noel was desperate for Oasis to get involved, and after some major hassling got lucky wangling a date on the bill at the Unsigned Talent Night. Oasis were due on stage at 10 o'clock, and there were a fair number of people in. I was amused to spot Gary Davis, the Radio 1 DJ, in the crowd. The guy stuck out like a sore thumb wearing those really bright clothes among the scallies and unwashed student crusty types. I can honestly say that the first national radio DJ to see Oasis live was none other than Gary Davis. Liam was still doing his loon-type dance and trying to sing like Ian Brown, very northern on the vowel sounds and slightly off-key. The gig at the Boardwalk on the 22nd of November 1992 was the first time Oasis encountered anything which resembled a crowd, with just over 100 or so people turning out on a cold Wednesday night. Oasis were bottom of the bill, headlining with the Cherries, together with Molly Harford featuring Noel's ex-colleagues Paul Barsley and Neil Daly. Molly Harford had just had a few singles out. They were the band most people had come to see. Still, there were a few influential Mancunians in the audience, a couple of DJs from the local stations like Craig Cash and Pete Mitchell, Terry Christian and all the people from Red Alert. In fact, they were all mates of Noel and Louise. Oasis were first on and blasted out 6 numbers: a version of Columbia, Take Me, Must Be the Music, an acoustic one, an untitled number, a rocky psychedelic cover of a house number called Better Let You Know, and attempted for the first time live Whatever with Liam comically holding the lyrics in front of him. They had been on stage for about 30 minutes, maybe more, and were just about to debut I'm the Walrus, when the Cherries, worried that everyone would leave after they'd seen Molly Harford, pull the plug on them. Well, there were a few words bandied about on stage with Al Liam, Noel and Bonehead storming off, leading to a ruck backstage with the Cherries, in which Oasis were the victors. The band really started to find its feet in March 1993. The time spent rehearsing showed, and they began to sound like they were getting somewhere when they ventured out of town to play in Liverpool, at Le Bateau. Oasis was supposed to be supporting a band called Small, now Smaller. The band's singer and songwriter Diggsy later became good mates with Noel. After Oasis had soundchecked, Diggsy said Oasis should headline because they were better than his band. Well, Noel loved that, and it says a lot for Diggsy. I can't imagine how many Manchester bands as good as Small are offering to let a support band move up the bill and headline instead of them, especially a band from out of town. In April, Oasis were back in Liverpool, again sharing a gig with Smaller, but this time at the Crazy House. This was the night I first really believed my brothers would make it. Noel suddenly hit a rich vein of form. Noel had been writing a lot and had a whole batch of good new songs to bring into the set. It was here that the band first performed Live Forever, Strange Thing, and Bring It On Down. The set was tight and sounded brilliant, and the crowd were really appreciative. At the end of the Oasis gig, the guys from The Real People, who were in the audience, decided to jump on stage and do an impromptu 20-minute encore to round off the night. They staggered around on stage, blitzed out of their heads, singing out of tune, but the audience loved it, joining in. It was when Diggsy invited Noel round to his house for tea that Noel was inspired to write the lyrics to Diggsy's Dinner. Noel hates anything fancy and foreign, and lasagna counts as that to him. Noel's eating habits aren't the healthiest and consist of a strange diet of pot noodles and burgers. It was around this time that Oasis recorded their famous live demonstration tape with the aid of The Real People's equipment and studio facilities. It was the first time Oasis had something on tape that would really turn heads. Oasis returned to Manchester's Boardwalk in May for the gig that at last started to establish them with their home crowd. Both Noel and I knew Ian Marr, but we didn't realise his brother was Johnny Marr. It was through this connection that Johnny Marr first got onto Oasis, and the band ended up with Marcus Russell managing them. Noel explained at the time, "I used to see this lad Ian down the Hacienda all the time in the late 80s, and we'd chat and have a laugh. I told him I'd got a band. Oh, what are he called? Oasis. All right, you'll have to get us a tape and I'll play it to our kid. I just thought, big deal, who's your kid? Johnny Marr. Well, I dragged him round to the flat and gave him a cassette. 2 hours later the phone rang and it was Johnny Marr himself. He'd heard our tape. This is amazing, can I produce your records? Johnny helped us quite a lot, getting us a top professional manager. After he came to see us, he actually phoned Marcus and said, I've just seen the greatest band of the last 5 years. It was at the end of the same month that Oasis landed their famous deal when they went up to Glasgow with the Sister Lovers to play at King Tut's Wawa Hut. The Sister Lovers thought they'd sorted out with the promoter that Oasis could play too. Basically, the promoter was worried by the small turnout and refused to let Oasis play. Noel pointed out that they had brought 17 people up from Manchester with them, and if they didn't play, things might get out of hand, as they'd all travelled a long way and expected to see them play. Eventually, the promoter agreed to let Oasis play a short 15 or 20 minute set. Supposedly, the presence of Alan McGee, head of Creation Records, at the gig was a coincidence, but according to Alan, the story goes like this. I'd had an argument with my girlfriend, so I decided to go to Glasgow for the weekend. I needed cheering up, so I went to the club. Someone pointed out that all these guys from Manchester and said that I might kick off that night if they weren't allowed to play. When I saw them, I knew I'd just seen the greatest rock and roll band in the world, and I knew they thought I was mad when I offered them a deal there and then. It was pure coincidence. According to Noel, it was like this. When we finished playing, this tall geezer with a ginger skinhead and glasses wearing a denim shirt and white jeans came up to me. Do you want a haircut deal? He was very smooth and he handed me a card that said Alan McGee, President of Pop. I looked at it and said, so it's all your fault, is it then? He just said, look, don't take that piss. You don't know me. Yeah, but I've heard all this shit on your label. Suffice to say, Alan McGee was well impressed that night in Glasgow and bought the band train tickets to go down to London to see him a few days later. Noel remembers. Bonehead, Liam and I went down to see Alan at Creation in London. We were expecting it to be this big flash office. We got in a cab at Euston Station and ended up in Hackney. When we went into Creation, it was like a rubbish tip with empty bottles everywhere and people asleep. Then we had to go down to Alan McGee's office, which was called the Bunker, with a big door and a sign that read, Alan McGee, President of Pop. We just went in. He sent his assistant across the road to the pub for some Jack Daniels and said, do you like Rod Stewart? I said, yeah, and he said, right, you've got the deal. We just felt totally comfortable because they were all music fans. Noel got in touch with Johnny Marr, who'd already primed his own manager, Marcus Russell of Ignition Management, on Oasis, and the first steps to stardom were taken. At the time, Noel was just anxious to get a record out. He believed in his songs and was of the opinion that big mega deals and the charts would come later. He just wanted someone to put a single out for them and quickly. I think that was his only big stipulation with Alan McGee when he met him. In July 1993, Oasis played their last gig at the Boardwalk, and it was pretty well packed out. It seemed everyone had caught on to the fact that they had landed a deal with Creation Records. There have been a couple of pieces in the Manchester Evening News in the past year, and City Life were now getting interested, mainly due to the live demonstration tape that the band had recorded with the real people in Liverpool back in May. What was encouraging was that a few local DJs had been playing tracks from it, like Pete Mitchell on his IQ show on Piccadilly Key 103 FM and Terry Christian on Red Rose FM in Lancashire. A lot of people had started to hear Oasis tracks outside the confines of Manchester's incestuous music and media circles. The NME were there for the first time. Emma Morgan, a small, quiet, bespectacled girl from Brooklands, just 17 years of age, who was covering live gigs in Manchester at the time, had heard the Oasis demo on Craig Cash's show on Signal Cheshire and had hustled to get NME to let her review the band's gig. It was a great write-up. It went something like this. Shout to the rooftops and dance in the streets, creation have not gone mad. Their latest find, Manchester's Oasis, are a genuinely fine guitar-propelled band with little of the crass baggage such a description suggests. They're not perfect. They might find it hard instinctively to impress, but they still stomp out the kind of terrifyingly memorable tunes that most bands forgot how to make as they blundered around on the periphery of true talent. Sound-wise, they're slightly reminiscent of a drugged-up version of the Stone Roses. It's almost as though everyone's favourite stroppily invisible Manx have grown up and decided to take it slow this time. Mercifully, what they haven't mislaid is the basic brilliant melodic framework as demonstrated by opener Stray Dogs, with a rhythm involving more than 3 chords and a lyric concerned with driving your mates mad with jealousy because you're getting some bloke's lasagna. Hopefully not a metaphor. And they're not. It's impossible not to be drawn in to take a closer listen. I think our Liam must have memorised it by heart. If all the people who now say that Noel asked them to manage Oasis got together, they'd probably film Main Road. Noel wanted someone he could trust, who knew the market, was as ambitious as Liam and himself, and had a proven track record. Marcus Russell, a 40-something Welshman, an ex-school teacher, realised there was a huge gap in the market for a truly great British rock band, and Johnny Marr had convinced him Oasis were that band. As things started to happen for them, Noel and Liam really showed their ambition for the band. They wanted to be the biggest and best in the world. Even though they fought each other and bitched about each other, they believed in each other's talents. I think Noel looked at Liam and to a certain extent wished he could be him and have that outward confidence and cockiness and of course be that age again. Liam really admired our Noel's ability on the guitar and wished he could write songs like him. As for me, well, I just wished I had a chance to show some talent somewhere and not have to spend my whole life digging ditches for a pittance at the end of the week. I remember going for a drink with drummer Tony McCarroll and he was a bit apprehensive about the band's future. I reassured him that the band would do really well. I know people say stupid things like I knew from the first time I saw them they were going to be massive, but I knew Oasis would be successful because you could see the improvement every time they played in both their performance and the way the songs were coming together. It's hard to imagine your younger brothers becoming the new Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. They are too real for that. But our Noel, who I always knew was talented, outshone even my own expectations with both his songs and superstar demeanour. It was fascinating to me to be able to see them take off. That's why I wanted to be there like the devil on their shoulder. I wanted to witness their metamorphosis from Manchester lads to rock stars. The live demonstration tape was winning them fans, and there was suddenly a lot of interest. The band now had management, a record deal, and a promoter. The next thing was a record, and plans were afoot to get a promo 12-inch white label out by Christmas, which would be sent out to radio stations. Oasis's first break nationally came in August 1993, when they were live on BBC Radio 5's Hit the North, playing 2 or 3 songs including Cigarettes and Alcohol. In September, the band received a glowing write-up from Terry Christian in the word column in the Manchester Evening News. Terry described them as a band that had got it all. A primal scream meets the Beatles with a tinge of stadium rock thrown in for good measure. In reviewing the tracks of the live demo, one almost prophetic thing he wrote concerned the song Do You Want to Be a Spaceman? In the article he described them as a band with a very big future and compared them to current music press Flavour of the Month Evan Dando, saying, "If Evan Dando had penned a song like this, journalists would be writing even more reams proclaiming his genius. Having said that, I won't be surprised if indie's music's golden boy covered a delight such as this. By the following year, Evan Dando had latched onto the band as a celebrity fan and did record a version of Live Forever, but decided not to release it. I've got possibly the only copy. The band had been going for just over 2 years and still hadn't played a gig in London. Consequently, nobody from London had been to see them live. The situation was about to change when the band were booked to play on Creation Night at the Canal Cafe Bar on Whitworth Street, Manchester, on September the 14th, 1993. Manchester was buzzing for those 4 days or so, with music business people from London, New York, Los Angeles, all over, descending on Manchester and bringing in their wake hordes of journalists and the like. There were probably about 250 people crowded into the place, but it wasn't quite full. There was a good atmosphere, and I saw Oasis manager Marcus Russell in a buoyant mood. The only national journalist there was Paul Mather from Melody Maker, who came and introduced himself. Mather, a tall, bespectacled Scouser, was blown away by the band. He gave Oasis a brilliant review in Melody Maker. The piece was headlined Desert Brats, and it goes something like this. In years to come, everyone will claim to have been here, but a word of warning, I've got all the ticket stubs, I know who you are. Oasis are magnificent. I've been exploring their edges for 3 months now, watching them get ready to slay you, to obsess you, to prove themselves as, get ready for this, the best new band in Britain. Let's get the signposts out of the way first. The Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, the Sex Pistols, I know, about a million others, have all played their part in creating the joy that is Oasis, but it's the way they pull their influences together and invest them with an exuberant, menacing freshness that makes them so important. Oasis are the most natural stars I've seen in years. Singer Liam lopes around the stage with an air of someone who was born to inhabit the space around the mic, guitarist Noel exuding similar ease as he hurls out waves of shimmery, rich sounds. After Oasis' big review in Melody Maker, they were back gigging again. Oasis supported Liz Phair, the strange American at the university in Manchester, and got a mention in the gossip column of the NME. It went something like this. Woman of rock, Liz Phair may not be all she seems. Apparently Ms. Walk on the Wild Side was completely appalled when she had to share a dressing room with rock gods-to-be Oasis at Manchester University, not because their feet or breath smell, though they do, but because they look like extras from an Andy Warhol movie and talk like New York drug addicts to boot. The real story that night was, we were all in a dressing room drinking a beer and being generally rowdy when she came in and started ranting about how we'd just taken over. Then one of Liam's mates asked her to get her tits out for the lads, which we all found highly amusing, such was our state. She wasn't too pleased about that. Then another of Liam's mates asked her if she had any drugs, and she just did a double huff, calling us a bunch of lowlives and junkies. That same month, October, Oasis supported the Milltown Brothers at the university again, and then set off on a short tour supporting the BMX Bandits. I kept an eye out for any mentions they had in the press, cutting out even the little adverts and sticking them in scrapbooks I bought from the local paper shop. It started getting too much like a full-time job by the middle of 1995, so now our mum does the scrapbook on us. Once the Creation deal was in the bag, my brothers went into overdrive. I couldn't keep up with them. They had a promo 12-inch of Columbia, a favourite at their gigs, due out as a sampler in January, with the first single due in the early spring. The more heated the press became, the more obvious it was that there was no one else around. Suede were too self-conscious as a band and were never going to cross over into the big time because they were too quirky. But Oasis had it all. They had the laddishness of the Happy Mondays, the rock and roll poise and coolness of the Stone Roses, and a way of touching sensitive parts other bands could not reach, the way the Smiths did. Most encouraging about the deal with Creation from Noel's point of view was Alan McGee. He encouraged Noel, as Noel later acknowledged. I get a buzz from giving new songs to Alan McGee because he actually thinks we're the greatest rock and roll band in the world. He phones me up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I'll get out of bed and it's McGee on the other end enthusing. I'm feeling supersonic. Give me gin and tonic. We're gonna annihilate the world, man. That in a nutshell is why we're with Creation Records, because the president is up at 5 in the morning reciting the lyrics down the phone. The music press were catching on to this, and so were the audiences. Coming up to Christmas, the 4th of December 1993, Oasis were playing at Warwick University. I managed to scrounge a lift in the van with Bonehead, Gwigsley, Tony and Phil Smith, the band's drum technician. Noel decided he was fed up with sitting in the van and went down by a hire car with Mark Coyle driving. Liam said he'd make his own way down the train. Once the band had set up, they started looking for Liam. There was no sign of him. The band sound checked. Where was Liam? Noel was really tensed up about it because if Liam didn't arrive, Noel would have to sing, and it wasn't his job. 8:30, still no sign of Liam. The dressing room was quiet. Marcus Russell was pacing up and down. The band were due on stage at 9:30. Suddenly, at 8:45, Liam Head pops round the door. As cool as you like. All right. Noel was so mad he couldn't hold back, and he grabbed a plastic chair and flung it at the floor in front of Liam. It bounced up with that much force it went right over Liam's head and flew over the stage area and smashed to bits on the dance floor. "You dickhead, what time do you call this?" Noel shouted. A heated argument raged as to who was right and who was wrong, with everyone siding with Noel against Liam. After all the shouting, the gig went brilliantly, all that anger and adrenaline fueling a powerful set. Liam came home with us in the van. He was in a big sulk about everyone picking on him. He started on me and I kept telling him what an unprofessional prick he was. We were both completely drunk. Liam decided we should stop the van and get out by the side of the road and sort our differences out. Bonehead was having none of it, just put his foot down and got us home to Burnage as fast as he could. Instant self-worth is what I got, no matter how fleeting. By going to my brother's gigs, I knew the songs, I knew Liam, I knew Noel, and that suddenly made me feel someone worth talking to. I'd been a DJ around the Irish clubs a few years earlier, just like our dad. Later, when they'd had a couple of chart successes, our Liam turned to me and said, "Pretend you're not me brother." He could charm the birds off the trees, that boy. It was an exciting time for Oasis, that whole run up to Christmas. The demo of Columbia was pressed up on a white label and sent out to radio and TV stations. Radio 1 started playing it on the evening session and gave Oasis their first Radio 1 spot before Christmas. The press was starting to rave about them, but one piece, the first review they'd had in the NME since Emma Morgan's in July, caused quite a stir. It was written by Johnny Cigarettes, who saw the band supporting Saint Etienne. He slagged them off as being a bunch of refugees from Manchester's 1989 scally baggy scene, and wrote some rather unkind things about our Liam as a frontman. Liam was fairly frothing at the mouth and his language was choice. Sometime later, all the band were in a club in London watching Scottish four-piece guitar band Whiteout when Bonehead pointed Johnny Cigarettes out at Liam. He was blonde, wore glasses and was about 6'6", tall like some clone bred in an SS breeding vat in Nazi Germany. Bonehead turned to Liam and said, "Bloody hell, he's big." Liam was unperturbed and replied, "He won't look that big with a bottle sticking out of his head." The gig Cigarettes had reviewed was the 1st of December 1993. The following night, Oasis were again supporting Saint Etienne, this time at the Plaza in Glasgow. Luckily for the NME, Calvin Bush was there to put things right with a glowing review. It went something like this. "They're frankly incredible. They leave. I gasp and ache. The thought of having to wait a whole 10 days before they play here again is already cramping my lifestyle." Oasis hit the headlines in the music press again for the first gig abroad, mainly because they never got to do it. They were due to play in Amsterdam at the Sleep-In Arena with Verve. It was Liam's first ever trip outside the country, and he was mad for it, to use his own vernacular. The boats going to the Hook of Holland, have a disco on board, and a bar open all night. The band were drinking during the 8-hour ferry trip, and Gwigsy and Bonehead were singled out and accused of passing a fake £50 note over the bar. The sound of any argument immediately attracts our Liam, who tried to calm things down by taking a swing at one of the boat's crew. They all ended up involved in a drunken brawl and were arrested and put in the brig. They were deported the next day. All of them, that is, except Noel, who was sleeping in his cabin totally unaware of what was going on. He got off at the Hook of Holland and was left waiting for them at the port, not realising they'd been shipped off back to England. The first single was supposed to be their live favourite, Bring It On Down, but according to Noel, things didn't go as planned in the studio. We were in Pink Museum Studios in Liverpool recording Bring It On Down and a couple of old songs for the B-side. It was hell. We were falling asleep playing them and I was thinking, these are crap. I just threw a bit of a tantrum and said we should scrap the lot and that I was going to write 2 new songs. That's when I wrote Take Me Away and Supersonic. In fact, if you listen to Take Me Away, it lasts 4 minutes 35 seconds and that's exactly how long it took me to write it. I rang Alan McGee and he asked if I'd finished and done our B-sides, so I played him Supersonic down the phone. He couldn't believe I'd written it in a day and threatened to sack every other artist on the label. It was a matter of 6 to 8 weeks before the band's first single was to be released. They were desperate for a TV slot to go with it, but the only major pop show, Channel 4's The Word, was finishing its run for that season on the 18th of March. The Oasis single wasn't due out until the 11th of April. Terry Christian, the show's presenter, had been to see the band a couple of times and had given them a good write-up in the Manchester Evening News. He assured Noel he'd do what he could to get them on. Sure enough, on the 18th of March 1994, they were included in the band lineup for the final show. I think about a third of the audience that night had travelled down from Manchester. It was fairly rowdy in the studio and a couple of lads got thrown out. After about 11 hours of setting up, sound checking and rehearsing, Oasis' performance was magnificent, eclipsing the much raved about Soul Asylum, whose album had been at number 1 in the American charts for weeks. Terry's guest that night was Sir Bob Geldof, who was wearing a strange yellow tartan suit. He said with some vigour that Oasis were great. After the show, we all piled into the backstage bar area, where there were about 200 people having an end-of-show party. We stayed there for a couple of hours drinking with all these different Mancs and Diggsy and all the lads that were smaller who'd come down as well. Liam was off his face. He'd been walking round all night pretending he was a Scouser and had spoken to Paulie Yates for the first time. There was a rumour that Winona Ryder would be at the bar after the gig, but we didn't spot her. Nowadays, Liam and Noel hobnob with her ex-fiancé, Johnny Depp, and his girlfriend, supermodel Kate Moss. I love those kind of nights. There was something magical and special about them. After their appearance on The Word, everything seemed to go smoother for Oasis. The crowds at all their gigs almost trebled, and they began to get the real star treatment at all the venues they played at. It was a case of constant gigging right up to and through the release of Supersonic. All the press who'd been holding back on Oasis now started muscling in on it too. Whether it was Q Magazine, Vox, Select, Smash Hits, Melody Maker or The NME, you couldn't open the paper without seeing Noel and Liam staring out at you. When Supersonic was released, we weren't sure what to expect. It was very different from what had been charting at that time. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my mum. It was tense, listening to the brand new National Top 40 chart rundown on BBC Radio 1 that night, 17th of April 1994. Then the DJ announced that Oasis had gone straight in at number 31. My mum's face just lit up. Supersonic peaked in the national chart at number 31, but made the number 1 spot in the independent charts. Then Oasis set off on a UK tour to such exotic locations as Hull, Coventry, Portsmouth, Newport, Derby, Leicester, Northampton, Chelmsford, Cambridge, Sheffield, and of course London. Until Supersonic charted, fans hadn't been a problem, but with their appearance on The Word, all the photo spreads of our Liam in Smash Hits and the press articles, the band was starting to get mobbed. I'd seen our Noel pushed all the way across the room by a horde of screaming girl fans until he was almost flattened into the wallpaper. They would all talk at him at once, ask weird questions and then carry on talking over him when he tried to reply. Liam was beginning to find it all a bit too much. Noel had travelled everywhere and knew the ropes, and he understood about interviews and publicity and just how totally gruelling touring is. Early on in the tour, Liam found himself doing the interviews. He didn't mind at first, but he started to do his head in. He made a few gaffes doing local radio interviews, some of which, luckily for Oasis, never got aired. In a famous NME interview, Liam gave a journalist a first-hand eyewitness account of a fight between him and Noel. He explained later. We had the first big interview we'd ever done with the NME. Our kid started putting me down like I was this big, so I just told him, "Here you are, someone's asked me a question, you chill out and let me answer." Anyway, he just kept on and on getting at me, so we had a fight and the press got onto it. Finally, at the Creation Undrugged concert at the Royal Albert Hall, Liam was totally done in. They only had to perform 3 songs, Shake a Maker, Live Forever and Whatever, but Liam complained of a sore throat. Noel wasn't having any of it. He didn't believe Liam, but found himself taking over the vocals that night for the first time ever. Doing more than a decent job. It helped him to decide to sing more often live. Although he had sung on various records including Take Me Away, the B-side of Supersonic, Liam didn't help at all by turning up at the Albert Hall on the night heckling Noel and shouting abuse at him. After the Albert Hall, it was back on the road doing gigs in Norwich Arts Centre and the London Marquee before a triumphant homecoming gig to over 1,000 people at Manchester University. They played 41 concerts across the country in the last 6 months, and Manchester was at last ready for them. Oasis were unusual in that way. They struggled early on to build a following in Manchester. The set was sounding really good by now, with the old songs sounding better and some impressive new ones. The band's next single, Shake a Maker, was scheduled for release on the 20th of June and had already been played on the local stations, and Radio 1 weren't too far behind. There was no doubt in my mind that it was going to get them on top of the pops. Noel explained. I'm obsessed with the guitar, I always have been. I've got a 1965 Les Paul Gibson that I bought from Johnny Marr, but when I write, I normally do it on my acoustic. To write a tune, I normally just bash a few chords that fit together, have a melody in my head, find a starting point, and then hum the melody. That dictates where the music goes and vice versa, and then I get the shapes of the words. I just play it over and over. The lyrics I find a lot more difficult. I usually lock myself in a room with a bottle of gin, 20 Bensons, get drunk and write the words. I don't write songs with messages as such, or a song about any one particular thing, but there are some lines in each song that I'm proud of. Just how big Oasis had got by this time was made clear when people in the audience at that Manchester University gig started to sing along to Supersonic and Shaker Maker and seemed to be going wild everywhere. I don't think it was a happy homecoming for Noel, as it was the night he finally split with Louise Jones after going out with her for 6 years. They split up before but always got back together again. He didn't talk about it, but I knew he was feeling dazed and confused. He decided to move away from Manchester permanently. He became especially self-conscious about finishing with Louise because they had a lot of friends in common. To the outside world, Louise may have seemed to be the injured party, dumped by the budding pop star. I know my mum was quite upset at the time because Louise had become like a daughter to her. Louise still rings me mum occasionally for a chat, and I'm sure she always will. Before the release of Shaker Maker, I wasted a chance to warm up for the festival debut at Glastonbury by playing at Avon Park, Preston, as part of the Heineken Big Top Free Music Weekend. Oasis played second on the bill to the Boo Radleys. The two bands did a long and exhausting signing session with over 1,000 people queuing for autographs. Liam even signed somebody's trainers. There must have been 8,000 people in the park, most of them fairly rowdy. Halfway through the band's second song they had to stop when some idiot in the crowd threw a bottle at Noel. Once things had calmed down they belted out an almost immaculate set, finishing off with I Am the Walrus. They were going into orbit. I remember Martin Carr, the Boo Radleys, walking round the side of the stage area, shaking his head and saying, "How on earth can we follow that?" I felt like saying, "You can't." After gigs in Glasgow and a hop over to play a famous one-time strip joint, Erotica, in Paris, it was time for the bands to get ready for the release of Shaker Maker and the Glastonbury Festival the following weekend. Shaker Maker, with its references to Mr. Sifter's record shop, had been getting hammered to death on all the radio stations. On the 22nd of June, Oasis were recording a live version for a new and deservedly short-lived Channel 4 show called Naked City. Noel's been interviewed. In the early days, he worried more about interviews than writing the songs and performing. He did at first give Liam that task, but Liam just says the first thing that comes into his head, and sometimes that can be explosive and career-threatening. On Naked City, Noel was fairly amusing, wittily replying to some fairly smash-it-style questions. Interviewer: "What would you do if you thought you were being too famous?" Noel: "I'd probably go out and buy a chocolate brown Rolls Royce in my own hotel room so I could trash it." On Saturday the 25th of June I travelled down to Glastonbury to see my brothers play the following day. Glastonbury was a real culture shock for me, full of hippie and crusty types, veggie burger stalls and local hawkers and sellers. Liam hadn't returned to the hotel on the Saturday night, which put everyone on a bit of a downer. This was Sunday. The new charts would be announced between 5 and 7 on Radio 1. They were playing in front of the biggest crowd ever, and our Liam wasn't anywhere to be found. It was a carnival atmosphere on the site. There must have been over 50,000 people milling around the place, over half of them caned out of their brains on booze and drugs. The place was crawling with mangy-looking dogs, posh white youths with dreadlocks and joints the size of hot dogs, and student types with small scraggy dogs on bits of string. Liam still hadn't turned up. Search parties were dispatched to find him, and I know was feeling particularly moody. Finally, about an hour before they were due on, Liam showed up, bad-tempered and defensive about where he'd been, wearing the same clothes he'd had on for the past 2 days. But Oasis were really up for this one. This was their cup final. I estimate there were 5,000 people watching them play, dancing round, sitting on each other's shoulders, waving plastic beer, coke and water bottles in the air above their heads. I felt really proud of my brothers, especially when we heard later that Shaker Maker had just gone straight into the charts at number 11. After the gig everyone was buzzing. I spotted the Inspiral Carpets and went over to chew the fat with them. When I went back to Noel and Liam, they said, "What are you talking to them for?" Liam made me laugh. After gobbing off to me about talking to them, he went over for a chat and even posed for a photo with them for the NME photographers. But then, that's all part of rock and roll. Oasis finally made their Top of the Pops appearance. History had been made, and they'd make some more, but it was only 1994 and they were still small time, though they didn't act it. In July, they made their first trip to the States to play Wetlands in New York City as part of New York's International Music Seminar. The gig went down well with various luminaries in the audience, including Sonia, the lead singer with Echo Belly. After the concert at Wetlands, Oasis stuck around in New York to film the video for the next single, Live Forever, in Central Park. It's an unusual video. In it, the band buries Tony McCarroll, the drummer. I wonder if he knew that within a year he would be buried again, and this time for good, as far as playing with Oasis went. The next big fun away day was at Glasgow's T in the Park. I travelled up with the band in the minibus driven by ex-Stone Roses roadie Al Smith. Al was a top geezer, but all those years with the Stone Roses had destroyed or pickled a few of his brain cells. We were about 30 miles south of Glasgow when he decided to fill the tank up at a garage. He filled the tank with unleaded petrol. About 200 yards further down the road, the engine spluttered and died. Noel was furious. Al's years of training on the road took over as he sprang into action by shrugging his shoulders resignedly and skiing up a large joint. We called the AA, then we all piled out the broken van, which we pushed onto the hard shoulder, and started playing frisbee across the dual carriageway, dodging the traffic as it sped by. That's marijuana for you. We were laughing our heads off when the frisbee suddenly got stuck in a sign on the central reservation. Our Noel, competitive to the last, dodged in and out of the speeding cars to retrieve the plastic disc and continue the game. Mark Coyle commented wryly, "There goes the future of rock and roll. I hope he doesn't get run over." Oasis were playing on Sunday on the same bill as Dareem, House of Pain, Whiteout, Thrum, One Dove, Mike Peters and Tiny Munro. They weren't playing on the main stage, but in a tent with a capacity of around 6,000. By the time Oasis came on, there were 10,000 people trying to cram in, and many more outside. Maybe it was the Celt in them, or the fact that they were working-class northern boys, but the Glasgow crowd welcomed them like they were local heroes, cheering when Liam started playing football on stage. I was wedged at the side of the stage, endeavouring not to get crushed by the throng of screaming girls pressing ever closer. "Liam! Liam!" The crowd were mental, singing along to every song, the first time it had ever happened. When Liam and Noel came off, they were on cloud 9, saying it was the best gig they'd ever played. After Oasis' set, I met Alan McGee and his business partner Dick Green in the beer tent. We talked about the forthcoming debut album, Definitely Maybe, which they hadn't heard as yet. It had taken longer than anticipated to record. They recorded the whole album twice and scrapped it, so when it all started to come together, I think it was a big relief for Noel and an even bigger one for Alan McGee. I assured both Alan and Dick that when Definitely Maybe came out, it would be huge. But how huge, I had no idea. Oasis was getting too big, too fast. All the press stories of backstage punch-ups and trashing hotel rooms had hyped up this image of the fighting Gallaghers. At the Newcastle Riverside Club on the 9th of August, some moronic Geordie, after one too many Newcastle brown ales, jumped up on stage and punched Noel in the face with his sovereign ring, cutting our Noel around the eye and leaving him with a nasty bruise. The gig had only just started, and Oasis only played 2 numbers. Noel retaliated by kicking the guy in the head and swinging his guitar at him, while Liam went into overdrive, frothing at the mouth and steaming into the guy ferociously, eventually being dragged off. Noel was bleeding and shaken, and the crowd weren't pleased when the gig was abandoned, throwing bottles at the group, and later, when they were leaving the venue, attacking the tour bus and smashing all its windows in. It was this incident that made the group's management realise that they were a big-name band now, even if they weren't yet in the top 10. After some discussion, the band's security was immediately stepped up by bringing in Ian Robertson as minder, an ex-army man and an old friend of the band's manager Marcus Russell. Liam hated Robbo after several incidents, including being physically dragged out of bed one morning when he was entertaining and pushed up against the wall with no clothes on. The band waited all that week while gigging, excited to find out how their new single Live Forever would do in the charts. It went straight in at number 10. I felt especially proud and was now quite certain that when Definitely Maybe came out, it would top the album charts. The enthusiasm of Oasis' loyal fans was starting to become overwhelming by this time, and they also had a bevy of groupies, press and weirdo types tracking them down to their hotels. To counter this constant invasion of privacy, for the gig at Nottingham's Rock City on the 15th of August, Oasis checked in under different names for the first time. Rock City was a 1,500 capacity venue and was a real sweatbox. It was hard to see the band, though the sound was great. In London the next night, the Forum was absolutely heaving with people, but the problem with the London venues by this time was that Oasis had become a socialite band. So all these terribly nice people, the exact opposite of Oasis' scally roots, were turning up just because Oasis were the band to go to see. The day following the Forum, Oasis made their second appearance on Top of the Pops playing Live Forever. It was their third top 40 single and third indie number one. Oasis were in overdrive again. They planned a video shoot on the 21st of August at the Borderline Club in London for the Cigarettes and Alcohol single. When they arrived there, they found 500 fans waiting around outside, so they turned it into a free gig. Following the video shoot, they were off again, this time to Holland and the Lowlands Festival, where they played another tent gig to over 7,000 people. The band were in buoyant mood. Their debut album was ready to come out, and all the lead up to it told you it was heading straight in at number one. It was at the Buckley Tivoli gig in North Wales that I first came into contact with Evan Dando, geeky rock god and lead singer and songwriter with the Lemonheads. Evan was hanging out with Oasis, turning up at their various gigs around Britain, including the band's album launch at the Virgin Megastore in London, where he played a surprise acoustic set as a warm-up. When Oasis came on stage, it was blistering and powerful stuff. Somebody in the crowd flung a bottle at our Liam, who remonstrated by shouting, "Leave it out, I'm not a sodding coconut on a stall." After the launch, Evan Dando, by now totally off his trolley on gratis beer, went running out onto the roof of the building with his guitar and proceeded to perform an acoustic set to the throng of girls hanging around for him and the Oasis boys in the car park below. It was like Beatlemania in Dublin. Oasis' first Irish gig, and the local press went to town on all the band's Irish connections. Bonehead's parents were from Mayo, and Tony McCarroll and Paul McGuigan's people were from Northern Ireland, as well as the Gallagher boys with roots in Meath and Mayo. I decided to make my own way to Dublin on the plane. I met up in Dublin with some mates, and with a bit of messing around, I got 8 of us into the venue, which was again heaving. Those young Irish fans took the biscuit. They were cheeky and down to earth, but music mad. One fan told me, "Oasis are our Beatles, not you too." It was like a homecoming for the Manchester Irish. Now apparently 1 in 2 Irish households owns an Oasis album. Outside after the gig, Liam and Noel were literally mobbed. While I stood to one side to let them get on with it, I watched amused as one desperate young lad pleaded with Liam, "Liam, have you anything you can give me as a souvenir? Anything be grand. Sure it would." Liam self-consciously fumbled around in his pockets, pulled out a 2-pence piece and handed it over to the young lad, who ran off holding it up as if it was a pot of gold from over the rainbow. After the In the City week, Oasis headed off to Japan and then on to their first American tour. I read about them cancelling gigs and Noel and Liam arguing until finally our Noel just skipped off and left them and spent a week or more in Las Vegas gambling trying to sort his head out. I think the strain of the constant touring and the sheer amount of gigs still to play was telling on the band. Noel returned for a big showdown meeting with the group. Tim Abbott from Creation Records flew over from London to act as an intermediary. Noel and the band made it up, and the Oasis show was on the road again. I was sitting at home one day when the phone went. "Hello? Is that Paul?" "It's Nigel here." "We met at Rock City in Nottingham. Look, I know it's cheeky, but are you going to see Oasis in New York on the 28th of October? I told him I'd love to, but I was on the dole at the moment and I couldn't afford it. He continued, "The thing is, we can't really go without you as we haven't got any tickets, so if you reckon you can get us into the gig, we'll pay for your flight." Well, that was an offer I couldn't refuse. Noel had said that if I managed to get to any gigs in America, he'd sort us out somewhere to stay, so everything looked sweet for me 4-day round trip. The next day, 28th of October, Nigel, 2 of his mates and myself set out for New York via Heathrow. Straight away after landing, we made our way by cab with all our bags to Maxwell's Bar in Hoboken, New Jersey, birthplace of Frank Sinatra. We arrived at Maxwell's a good few hours before the gig, so we had no problems getting in. Noel and Liam were quite surprised to see me. Maxwell's was just a small bar which only held about 200 people, and it filled up as the night wore on. I had to keep pinching myself to prove that this was for real, that I was in New York, and about to see my brothers perform live to an American crowd. Oasis were like a finely tuned car, the way they seemed to cruise effortlessly into top gear on stage. For the first time ever, they dedicated a song to me on stage, Liam grabbing the microphone saying, "This one's dedicated to our kid who's just flown in from Manchester." Noel leaned up to the microphone for his sly dig. "We're not playing Lip Up Fatty, are we?" It's a good job he was on stage at that time, because if I got my hands on him, he'd have been tuning that guitar with his spinkster muscles for the next week. Anyway, this one's for our kid who's over at the bar. Cigarettes and alcohol. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't really chuffed about that. It's the only time they've ever dedicated a song to me, and I'll treasure it. After the gig, Nigel and his mates went off to Catskill. I went back with a band. The next day, Oasis were playing Wetlands in New York, a much larger venue than Maxwell's. I travelled down with the band for the sound check at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There were about 500 or so people at the gig, including a lot of expatriate British, a whole bunch of Chelsea fans who were fairly obnoxious, several record company types, Paul Mather from the Melody Maker, who was standing on his own in a corner with his jotter out like a train spotter waiting for an Intercity 125, a bevy of beautiful rock chicks, Bonez's brother Martin, who lived in LA and had flown across especially for the gig, Evan Dando, and some American journalists. After the gig, we went to a party hosted by a well-to-do American woman who was involved in running the world-famous Wilhelmina model agency in New York. The party was held in her loft apartment from which you could gaze across the alluring New York skyline. It was like something out of a movie. The booze was flowing freely and I ended up drinking myself under the table and promptly falling asleep there. It was a top party. I woke around 9 o'clock the next morning feeling rough as hell and made my way back to the hotel to collect my stuff. As I arrived, the band were packing up to go. Noel suddenly pulled out a wad of money. He didn't need dough. He just handed me the bundle. It was about $300. I was rich. Then Liam came over to me. He was being nice, so something was obviously up. "Hey, Bod, can you do us a favour? Can you take a bag with a few things in it back to our house in Manchester with you?" I said, "Oh, that'd be no problem." Liam gave me the suitcase. It weighed a ton. The handles were coming loose and it didn't have any wheels on it. "Bloody hell," I gasped. "What have you got in here?" "Oh, just a few trainers and shoes and things," Liam replied. Later I took a peek. There were about 25 pairs of brand new trainers and an electric Japanese World Cup 94 souvenir that lit up and played "Ole, ole, ole, ole." Very amusing. I made it back to Manchester with the bags, many of its still unworn contents lurking Liam's Imelda Marcos-like wardrobe. Liam was a bit nonplussed by America. There weren't many decent nightclubs to go to. Drinking and clubbing ain't really the main leisure activity over there. It was also a little out of sorts because one night when leaving a club with Bonehead, a car full of guys drove past nearly running over Liam's foot. Liam started shaking his fist and shouting abuse at them. The car stopped and Liam was about to go for the guy who got out when he pulled out a gun. Liam was still shouting abuse when Bonehead intervened, dragging him out of harm's way. 1994 had been a great year. Definitely maybe had become the fastest selling debut album of all time in Britain. The next American tour in 1995 was to place Oasis firmly in that nation's rock and roll hierarchy. So far, after peaking in the American album charts at number 4 with What's the Story, Morning Glory, they are just one hit single and a tour away from cracking the place wide open. The reviews in America for Oasis have been cautious but optimistic. They have an edge. They aren't effete or pretentious, and the songs are direct and anthemic. America is the number one priority for Oasis now. It has to be. The American fans took to Oasis quickly. All their songs have universal themes. Been free, been positive, making things happen. Opportunities don't come every day, so when they do, seize them. That's why those ordinary working class kids in Britain love them too. They aren't a band for intellectuals or students to muse over. They're in your face, warts and all. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the various band members were digging holes for a living, and they've made it. That's a powerful message to deliver. Gigs, more gigs, singles, Cigarettes and Alcohol hit the spot, reaching number 7 in October, and Whatever charted in Christmas week 1994, reaching number 2. Some might say sailed into the number 1 spot in April 1995. Although it only remained there for 1 week, it was quite funny how the press covered Oasis' first number 1. They concentrated on the big-name stars spotted at the group's gigs on their second American tour. Ringo Starr, Janet Jackson, The Edge, Bono and Adam Clayton. They were becoming tabloid fodder. Every day I'd read stories like our Liam saying he tried taking heroin when he was 15. At the time, a number of British guitar bands had been desperately trying to break into the USA. Oasis looked likely contenders. In Britain, Blur had established a firm fan base and it had taken them the best part of 4 years to fill the vacuum of Britain's number 1 band. The music press already had an inkling that Oasis were heading to be that number 1 band. They had swept the board at the Brit Awards for 1994, Britain's version of the Grammys, and Oasis won a Brit for Best Newcomers. However, in the NME's Brit Awards, in the main voted for by the magazine's readers, Oasis and Blur just won about everything, and the evening belonged to Oasis. As the awards were announced, Oasis went up several times. First award was for the Best New Band. This is a reenactment of that night. Liam:
Thank you very much. It's a good job. Said 7 didn't win it.
Noel: I think there's enough said there, thanks a lot. The best single voted for by the readers went to Oasis for Live Forever. Liam:
I'm just glad Elastica didn't win it.
After the awards, drunk and heady, Noel and Liam were in great spirits and been interviewed by various people. Interviewer: What did you think of tonight? Liam:
Boring.
But with a smirk on his face. Noel: I thought we should have won more.
Liam: Yeah, we should have been voted Best Rap Artist.
Noel: Our kid, indicating a smiling drunken Liam, should have been voted Best Band because he's got 7 different personalities. He's got a top brass section. Our sales have definitely maybe hit the 1 million mark in the UK, and with a #1 single under their belt, Oasis look set to steal Blur's short-lived reign as the top British band in America. So the British press had a field day when Blur and Oasis released 2 singles head-to-head in August 1995. The whole thing ended up growing out of all proportion until there actually was genuine animosity between the two bands. The British press loved it. Northern working-class lads versus southern middle-class boys from the home counties. They played on everybody's prejudices. Blur won hands down with Country House going straight in at #1, and Oasis rolled with it going straight in at #2. This will embarrass our Noel and Liam, but it's true. Every time an Oasis record came out, my mother and I would buy about 10 copies each, all from chart return shops. We'd send them to relatives in Ireland or give them to neighbours. In the end, the Battle of Britpop was won by Blur, but so far it looks as if Oasis have won the war. The insults flew, with our Noel at one point being quoted in an Observer article as saying that he hoped Blur's Alex James and Damon Albarn die of AIDS. Noel had to do something about his AIDS remark. He wrote an open letter of apology. I would like to apologise to all concerned who took offence at my comments about Damon Albarn and Alex James in an Observer article printed last Sunday. As soon as I said it, I realised it was an insensitive thing to say, as AIDS is no joking matter, and I immediately retracted the comment, but was horrified to pick up the Observer and find the journalist concerned chose to run with it. Liam loves a bit of aggro in his life and tried to wind Damon up for some time later by going over to his girlfriend Justine Frischman of Elastica and chatting her up. He propositioned her and declared his love for her, all with a straight face of course, and on MTV. 1995 was a whirlwind year for Oasis. They slogged their guts out across the world. Tony McCarroll was the first casualty in the band. He and Noel just never got on. I think Tony guessed that the writing was on the wall from the start. It wasn't long after Supersonic came out and Oasis was still rehearsing at the Boardwalk in Manchester that Tony turned up to rehearse one day and found out Noel had set up his drum kit on the street outside. To be sacked from a band who you know are going to be as big as the Beatles must hurt, especially as Tony had been there from the days of the Rain, before even Liam joined. Noel used his Paul Weller connection to bring in Alan White on drums, the brother of the drummer in Weller's band. We were all concerned when Paul McGuigan claimed exhaustion and temporarily quit the band. When he collapsed with nervous exhaustion just before their What's the Story Morning Glory tour, he left the band searching desperately for a bass player. Gwiggs' replacement was Scott McLeod, who had formerly played in the Yayas, who Oasis had supported and played a few gigs with in their early days. Scott must have felt like he'd been transported to a different planet, going from playing to about 100 people in Manchester to suddenly playing big gigs in front of up to 4,000 people with all the attendant security and wearying travel. He couldn't adapt. But the worst thing was the way he just went, leaving the band high and dry, flying back to Manchester on the eve of Oasis' big TV debut in America on the David Letterman show. All Scott McLeod has ever said about the whole thing is that he just couldn't handle it. As things went, Gwiggsy made a swift recovery, rejoined the band and saved the day for Oasis. What's the Story Morning Glory was huge, the biggest selling album in Britain since Michael Jackson's Bad and U2's Rattle and Hum, eclipsing even the excellence of Definitely Maybe. My mum went to the launch party. Noel's girlfriend Meg secretly arranged for our mum to go down, sorting her out a train ticket and a car to pick her up at Euston Station. It was quite a day out for me mum, who had never in her life been down to London before. She was so excited. Of course Noel and Liam were really shocked when our mum turned up at the bash at the Virgin Megastore in London. Liam got quite emotional. "There are tears in my eyes, Mum. If it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't be here now." Oasis swept the board in terms of nominations at the Brit Awards in 1996, with Best Album for What's the Story, Best Video for Wonderwall, and Best Group. The Mercury Music Prize was well deserved, and I couldn't see anybody else winning it, when Definitely Maybe scooped the award for Best Album. As for the Ivor Novello Award for Best Songwriter, our Noel had to share it with those blokes out of Blur, so he refused to accept it. Our Liam could have done with being a bit more discreet with his affairs of the heart. I mean, he spins two different French girls the same line. Fancy a holiday in the south of France, sneaks off to the toilet for some intimate fumbling, and then ignores them. They are so overwhelmed by his smooth technique, they both sell their stories and bathe in the subsequent publicity and say, "He was so romantic." Of course, the News of the World and the various Sunday tabloids had great fun with our Liam over that one. They had a laugh with Noel too, and his cocaine on my cornflakes confessions. The fans in Ireland were desperate to see Oasis again, and they got their chance at Slane Castle, where Oasis played second on the bill to R.E.M., officially the biggest band in the world. My mother came over for this one, and a gaggle of my cousins, and an auntie from the Gallagher side of the family. It was a highly charged atmosphere marred by tragedy when two people drowned in the River Boyne that weekend near the site. Liam seemed to have a murder on his mind backstage. The crowd during the concert had been crushing forward and were told twice by Noel and Liam to back away. Then they rushed forward again. Some bright spark threw a rock at Liam's head which just missed and embedded itself in one of the band's speakers on stage. Afterwards, backstage, "Good gig," I said enthusiastically. Smack! Liam's fist just pounded into the side of my face and my eyes exploded. As I pulled back, he was up for more, ripping the sleeve off my jumper. That was it, I just steamed into him. We wrestled to the floor and I ripped his new Lacoste cardigan in revenge. While I was struggling with Liam on the ground, our man was going livid telling Liam to behave himself. Eventually I let Liam up and he immediately picked up a full can of beer and threw it straight at Noel's head. Noel didn't respond. All the guys out of the American rap group Spearhead were watching. "You guys are brothers? Man, I can't believe it. You're mad." When the coast was clear, Bonehead told me that Liam had been like it all day. Apparently, earlier on, U2's Adam Clayton had got into Oasis trailer and helped himself to a packet of cigarettes from the band's rider. Liam's hackles rose immediately.
"You got fucking millions of pounds, go and get your own fucking cigs."
The room as usual fell silent and everyone kept quiet, as is the norm when Liam decides he's got too much energy to keep locked in. A year later, and Oasis were back in Dublin again. I went over with my mum. I met up with my Auntie Kathleen and her 3 kids, my Auntie Bridie and her daughter. Noel had kindly paid for all the hotels. I had to laugh at all the street traders who were selling big bushy stick-on Gallagher eyebrows and all these Dublin kids walking round with them on. Inside the point, Oasis opened with the Swamp Song. Liam shouted out to the crowd in a mock Irish accent, "Are you mad for it?" And the resultant reply from the crowd was deafening. Then later Noel donned his acoustic guitar and strummed the opening chords of Wonderwall, and the 8,000 crowd just started singing en masse. Noel didn't sing one line. He played the whole song through to the end, merely accompanying the 8,000 voices on his guitar. I felt a sudden shiver down my spine and a rush of emotion for the first time ever at a concert, and I felt tears streaming down my face. I was thinking of my mother and her childhood, having to leave the country of her birth to escape the terrible poverty trap and look for work. Noel says that Wonderwall is about his girlfriend Meg, but what makes it a great song is that it can work on many different personal levels. To me, our mother is the Wonderwall. She was always there for us growing up, and she never let us see her feeling down. I'd always hoped my brothers would make it to the top, and I now know they have. The second night was also a great gig, and everyone in the crowd was ecstatic, especially the ticket touts who'd been getting up to £200 a ticket. Everyone was on a high, and the 2 nights had been like 2 big New Year's Eve parties. Well, I knew it was all too good to be true. Somebody had said earlier in the day that they heard a rumour that my father was in town. As it transpired, our dad had in fact checked into the same hotel as Noel and Liam and the rest of the band. I was drinking in the bar. Noel came over and said, "Don't look now, but Dad's over there in the corner." Liam had already been upset earlier in the day by a phone call from him via the News of the World. What did my dad want with us? He was accompanied by a News of the World journalist. They said they wanted a reunion story. I don't even think it was guilt catching up with him, just a nice lump sum of money offered by the News of the World. He's always giving crap to the papers, saying that he wants to see Liam and Noel again and be friends, be a father to them. Well, what about me? I notice I don't get a mention, but then I'm not a rich pop star. Noel went to tell Liam. After waiting what seemed like an eternity, Liam came down. Sure enough, he went for me dad, threatening him until the security stepped in. I think it was exactly what the press and me dad wanted.
Go and get Patsy Henshit to calm you down,
my dad said. Liam was threatening to break his legs while the band security men dragged him off. I just thought, what a sad old man. As the police came over and things were being smoothed over with the hotel management, Noel, Liam and I suddenly found out we were still brothers. Next morning before we left for the airport, I saw Liam and he seemed in good spirits. I won't be surprised if just having the chance to shout at our dad and threaten him had removed some kind of demon from his memory. The papers that morning were a treat. Liam bops his pop. Liam hooks dad in anger. I saw what happened, and Liam never laid a finger on him. Liam had a very stressful week with the constant press attention and boozing, which led to a slanging match with In-Excess frontman Michael Hutchence, an argument with Patsy, and to top it all, our dad trying to goad him. Some people say that Noel and Liam's heads have disappeared up their own bottoms, which is why they don't live in Manchester anymore. But I think it goes beyond that. Noel needed to go off and enjoy his fame and money, get his albums written and recorded, and be on hand to keep an eye on the business. It made me laugh when Liam went down to the Hacienda at Christmas in 1994 with a huge minder. Everyone was slagging him off. Look at that big head, what's he got a minder for? No one's going to bother him in here, it's only Liam Gallagher. It's just how us Mancunians are. You can't play the superstar in this town, even if you are one. About a year ago, Liam was on Deansgate in Manchester city centre, surrounded by about 15 girls fawning around him. It's bumper-to-bumper traffic on that road for most of the day, and it's always busy. 2 girls in an open-top car stopped at the lights nearby. Liam knew the girl who was driving. "Liam!" she shouted to him, and he immediately went over for a chat. Those lights changed from red to green to red again and back to green. In all, they continued chatting for about 20 minutes. So on a hot summer's day, our Liam had traffic on Deansgate backed up for a quarter of a mile, and not one car in that queue beeped its horn. Star quality or what? In August 1996, Oasis played to 250,000 people for 2 nights in a field in Nebworth, Hertfordshire, the biggest gig in their history and the biggest in Britain ever. Coming up was the 9th American tour, the most gruelling one to date. Oasis had already toured the USA 8 times in the last 30 months, not bad going for a British band. The tour got off to a rather inauspicious start when Liam decided that he wasn't even going to board the plane to the USA. Ever since he left Manchester to spend more time with his fiancée Patsy, he had been looking for somewhere to live. Patsy had put her house on the market at Liam's request so that they could find a house of their own. The American tour drew closer, and Patsy then found a buyer for the house. They looked and looked for a new home, knowing they would soon have nowhere to live and that they only had a few days before Liam went away. The house had to be right for Patsy, Liam, James, who's Patsy's son, and the nanny. When they moved out of Patsy's home, still with nowhere to live, and with the American tour on top of them, Liam had to make a decision. It was the US tour or the woman he was in love with and her child's welfare. He chose Patsy and James, and I for one applaud his decision. He couldn't bear the thought of the woman he loved being unhappy while he was away in the States, and if he had gone, he wouldn't have been in the right frame of mind to perform. Liam and Noel knew that, and that's why Noel went ahead and agreed to do the lead vocals. So Liam stayed, and they finally found the perfect house in North London. On Friday, 30th of August, Liam flew out to join up with Noel and continued the American tour. The next stop for Oasis was Detroit and the MTV Awards in New York. Here there was another uproar. "Yarbo Liam spits on fans!" Since when has it been a criminal offence for one to remove phlegm from one's throat and spray it on the floor? On Friday 13th September, American planes bombed Baghdad, but the tabloid headlines read, "Oasis to split." I had got into my office as usual but hadn't listened to the radio, so was oblivious to the big news story of the day. As I turned the corner into my mum's road that afternoon, I saw a bunch of reporters. They swarmed around me wanting to know whether I had anything to say about the news. "What news?" I asked. Oasis splitting up, they all shouted at once. It's news to me, I said. When I did finally manage to get hold of Marcus Russell, Oasis' manager, he reassured us that everything was fine, that Liam and Noel were okay, that no fight had taken place, but they were tired of touring and worn out. I wasn't allowed to tell the press this and had to read an official statement which only said that Oasis will be taking a break for the foreseeable future and neither confirmed nor denied the split. Meanwhile, what had really happened in America was that Noel had slowly come to the end of his tether. Liam's late arrival had not been a good start and the whole band were plain exhausted after the summer. Noel battled on until he finally decided he'd had enough. They needed a break from each other. The Oasis roadshow had lost its edge. Noel told Liam he was going home. Liam was dead chuffed, and that was all there was to it. They weren't talking about splitting up, they were just talking about getting away. Personally, I think there should have been a press conference to help out the Oasis fans who were obviously distraught. There was even someone in Germany who killed himself, saying that Oasis splitting up was part of the reason. Oasis will be back on tour in 1997. They have all but finished the mega massive third album, provisionally titled Be Here Now. I've heard 14 tracks in all, and it's incredibly powerful. Some of the tracks are really mind-blowing. It contains all the brilliance of the first two albums, but with a new hard rock edge. It'll be massive, a big fuck off to the world. I think they now feel they can cope with anything life or the world's media throws at them. This includes the unfortunate events in the early hours of Saturday 9th of November in Oxford Street, when Liam was arrested for allegedly possessing a small amount of cocaine. I can't help wondering whether he was set up. Did a member of the press call the police anonymously and tell them to pick him up? There seems to be a definite split in the press's attitude towards Liam and Noel. Noel has the respect of his musical peers and fellow musicians. No one begrudges the wealth that comes to a man who's written a hell of a lot of first-class songs. The fans adore him, and the press respects his privacy and don't follow him everywhere he goes. Liam, my baby brother, has one of the most difficult jobs in the music industry today. One slip and a camera will be there. That must be the most enormous pressure to live under. However, I think Liam has learnt a lot from his time in the limelight. I firmly believe that he is one of the most together people in the music business. He's lived the rock and roll lifestyle to extremes, but he's not about to burn out or freak out. He's identified what he wants from his personal life. A beautiful wife, a nice gaff and a kid. And now he's got what he wants. There are always rumours about Noel wanting to go solo and desert our Liam and the rest of the band. This is rubbish. Liam and Noel have got this far very quickly, but they remain together. They are much closer than any friendship could be because they are, above all, brothers. I have no doubt that they love each other more than anything, and as one who has sometimes looked in from the outside, I can vouch for that. This is my full story. I've never been so honest in my life. Honest about how I feel inside when it still seems choked up and mixed up at times. Honest about our childhood and growing up. And honest when I say I'm a big fan of my brother's music. And to round off this recording, I hand you back to my mother.
I'm happy to stay where I am in Manchester. This is my home and it'll always be a home for my boys whenever they need it. They know it's there for them. I cried every time I saw Oasis on television earlier on. The Word was the first TV show they did, and that's when I cried most. But I was really thrilled when Noel went on Channel 4's Big Breakfast and said he wrote Live Forever for me. I've had some great times with my boys. They are my life really, and very good to me. I have been to see them play a few times. I especially enjoyed Slane Castle in Ireland, and I'm going to see them when they play in Cork later this year. They introduced me to all these famous people. I've met Bono out of U2 and he was a very nice man. He even kissed my hand and said I reminded him of his mother. I was very ill recently and had to go to hospital. I thought I was on my way out. I caught pneumonia and the boys and their girlfriends looked after me very well. After I came out, I stayed at Noel's house in London with my sister Kathleen and my nephew Michael, who came over from Ireland to take care of me. Noel went away on holiday, but he left his chauffeur Simon and his Rolls Royce at my disposal, and we had a great time sightseeing. After Liam and Noel, my greatest wish is to see Paul do well with his A&R work and band management. If it was left to me, I'd like to see the three of them settle down, married, bringing up a family and living just round the corner from me. I suppose every mother wants that.